Schopenhauer, isn't it? You know, Hegel is the optimist. Schopenhauer said, you know, all those nasty things about Hegel.
That guy.
I was listening to some guys reading out a letter from his mother to Schopenhauer saying, you know, about you. You're always you're the most difficult person to get on with. You've always got, you know, this sort of negative opinion about everybody and everything.
Yeah. I can't remember who it was that I was reading was commenting on Winnie the Pooh of all things, saying the most remarkable feature of the stories of Winnie the Pooh are that nobody complains about Eeyore. They just accept him as, yeah, he's a little down, he's a little pessimistic, but we're still his friends. That's just the way it is. Some people feel that way, and we still like them. You don't see that much in stories. It's like what you were saying. People are trying to push their one view out on the world and make the whole world be uniform like them. And I don't know that people have always been like that, but we certainly come from a strand of civilization that has become addicted to the idea that there's one true way. And what a coincidence! It happens to be my way. Isn't that great? Now you all just have to do what I say, and we'll have a practical utopia. It never occurs to them. Aren't there like billions of other people? What are the odds? My way happens to be the right way. What are the chances? Little mathematics would do people some good. Well, I think we're at six after, so even though Ari's not here yet, Joe's not here yet, why don't we just go ahead and dive in and they can catch up? That's just how it'll be. So this is week three of our human natures interlude. Ooh, our human natures interlude. And this is a part of our Millennia in Microcosm seminar, but David suggested and I agreed that we put it under its own title and treat it as its own little intermission in the middle of Millennia Microcosm. And if we can convince Kenneth to let us insert his human natures paper into Millennium Microcosm when we print it, as a way to expand on the ancient worldview, well, then maybe retroactively this will become an organic intrinsic part just out of place. It would have been covered earlier. So all of this is an answer to Ari's question about a comment I made 3, 4 weeks ago about philosopher Kenneth Smith's interpretation of modernity as conducting a virulent, intensive form of genocide against the character type of Aristoi. The goal is to warp and bend and operant conditioning wise, you know, de aristos anybody with aristic tendencies and create a characterological flatland of Benausoi and Douloi. That is to say, Douloi, the marks, to be the majority, and Benausoi, the con men who can manipulate the marks to be the people in charge, and that this is the structure of modernity. It wasn't so clear early on in modernity when it was mainly about, you know, throwing off the corrupt regime of medievalism. But as modernity has succeeded and purified itself, it has shed things that we once would have thought were part of modernity, and it has exposed things that we were not so aware of in earlier centuries, but now it's becoming hard to ignore. And Kenneth does a lot of discussion about how and why this genocide takes place. And this paper, Human Natures, makes a nice through line. We are augmenting this paper with several dozen snippets of Kenneth Smith quotes from all over his works. I mean, everywhere. David has this marvelous archive, and he's been searching the archive for references to this issue of characterological genocide and sharing them with me on Facebook. And I'm numbering them all and summarizing them all and figuring out where to tie them into the paper. So probably starting next week, we'll begin introducing some of those snippets as well as going through the main text. But for now, we're going through the main text. Our first 2 weeks, we covered the abstract of his paper, and we wrapped that up just at the very end of last week. And uh, in the this week, we're going to begin with we're going to focus on two prefatory cautions. And one of them is in the paper itself. That's going to be the second one we cover. It's called Human Nature as a Prefatory Caution. We're going to go through all of that today. As Stephen, as you said last week, this paper reads faster, more smoothly than Millennium Microcosm does. So I think we can get through the Prefatory Caution this week. We'll slow down a bit when we get into the really juicy stuff in future weeks where we're getting into the character types. But I'm also inserting another prefatory caution before that, my prefatory caution about, well, I'll tell you what it's about in a moment. But why don't we begin like we usually do, with starting with David's summary that he wrote for us, posted on the meetup page. And I will drop that into the chat here. Oop, there we go. It's going to have to do it in two pieces. There's the first piece. There's the second piece. And why don't I drop in the link as well to the meetup chat? Now, I don't usually do that, do I? Normally, I post the paper, don't I? Let me see if I have a copy of it handy. The Human Natures paper. We'll come to it later. Well, I'll just post the text as we go. So let's just dive in. If Christianity believed every life is woven by divine design to impress a lesson and draw one into the sphere of spirit, as Kierkegaard superbly argued, the modern view is very different. Life to moderns is just what happens from the outside, externally, incidentally, navigating a wash of detritus in a meaningless, stochastic, or aleatory accidentalist universe. For moderns see themselves as arbitrary wills who have only a penny-ante or retail freedom to react however they like to the lie of adventitious circumstances. This gives moderns no competence to deal with or even to see the whole of life. They age but remain idiotes, infants. Moderns have been formed by a civilizational ideology or culture to take life as it comes. That's Kierkegaard again. To see it myopically or ad hoc. This makes moderns eminently experimental and adaptable, but it also makes them blind victims of the drift and currents of a fortuitous existence and a mutant, anomic form of society. Inmates of an asylum where schizophrenics write their own prescriptions. This is going to be the main thing we talk about today is the text that David is summarizing there. This, as you see, Kierkegaard's come up twice in there. He's a major frame of reference for Kenneth, especially on these issues. But before we get into the main text of the prefatory caution, I want to talk about my prefatory caution, and this is about something I said last week. We were playing sort of a trolley problem, weren't we? We were talking about a great ship that cannot turn around. It's in too much of a hurry. You're in a condition of war. The ship is massive. It has gigantic momentum, and someone falls overboard. And the question is, do you go back for them or not? And we were talking about that for, I don't know, a good half hour off and on. One of the ways we talked about it is, well, if someone is an Aristos, if you just accidentally drop Martin Luther King Jr. overboard, you better turn that ship around. Or if the person you dropped overboard is the key to winning the war, you're screwed if you don't go back and get him. So no matter how bad it is, you have to go back. And then we were talking about, but what if it's somebody who's never individuated themselves, a doulos, a creature of appetites. They spend all their time eating and cheating on their spouse, and I don't know what all they're doing, but they're just like any number of other people. And you're putting your ship at risk by going back for them. Then it becomes a bigger question. I remember we cited the examples from Master and Commander. And what was the one that Ari cited? He suggested we watch another film that has an example of someone dropping overboard. Anyway, we spent some time talking about this, and there's something that has to be said about it. I'm going to paraphrase the character of Miles Verkosigan from Lois McMaster's Bujold, her Barriar series. And she has this character, Miles Verkosigan, warn somebody, it is all too easy to become hypnotized by the hard choices. You can be in situations where you don't have a hard choice, but you feel like making hard choices is what men do, grown-up men, professional men, hard-headed men. And so you create situations that demand hard choices, even though it didn't actually demand a hard choice. You subconsciously wanted the opportunity to exercise your feeling of being tough. And so you say, oh, I'm sorry, we can't go back for him. Ugh. And maybe it's true and maybe it's not. But frequently it's not true. But the person wants to feel like a grown-up. And so they insist it's true and make you go on. Throwing people under the bus makes some people feel like grown-ups. Now, it's not to say there aren't times when you might have to throw someone under the bus. It might come up. But you have to be very, very careful about not manufacturing artificial, arbitrary situations where you do it because that way you feel like a grown-up. People do this all the damn time. Collateral damage, right? Human shields. This makes I'm Batman. This makes people feel like they're tough. But frequently it's very childish. It is ultimately appealing to zero-sum ideologies and to the fear that if we sacrifice for other people, then we'll be harmed. Sometimes it's true and sometimes it's not. We don't know. So with that in mind, I want to talk about some things around this issue that Kenneth's talked about mostly, and I've talked about a few of them, but I want to emphasize them here because just taken as I said it last week, what I said couldn't be taken as fully true. It could be very misleading. It could be a dangerous tool. So we begin with this point, which Kenneth makes all the damn time. Friedrich Nietzsche says philosophy is only for the healthy. The sick, it is ever made sicker. Nietzsche is on this, as someone who loves philosophy dearly. Nietzsche should be taken seriously when he says that philosophy is not a panacea. He says the problem is as William Blake says, as a man is, so he sees. So if someone doesn't have a philosophical character and you hand them philosophy, they're not going to receive philosophy. That's what you held out to them. But what they received is something else. They received the part of philosophy that makes sense to them, that's visible to them. So if they have the mind of a child, if they're living an appetitive, emotional, experiential life, then the only part of it that they can take is what makes sense to them from their own life experience. That's the doulos, right? Is there something appetitive or tasty in what you handed them? They might even memorize a philosophical aphorism because they just like the way it sounds. It might have rhymes or an interesting rhythm, but they wouldn't understand it. It's like an object. It's like somebody taking a lost manuscript from Aristotle, like say his Commedia, and not recognizing it for what it was, but thinking it's a very pretty object of art and sticking it up on a mantle, never reading it, never understanding it. But look at that object. This is the problem. And for Banalsoy, the problem is if you hand them philosophy, they turn it into sophistry. Instead of being, how am I trapped by my character and my circumstances? And what can I do to liberate myself from that trap, to develop myself into a more adult human being who has more individuality, more freedom, more personhood? How can I do that? You hand a Banalso something like that, and they turn it into, how can I pick apart the people around me? How can I find their flaws and complain about their movements, their political organizations, their social or religious organizations? How can I make everybody around me seem smaller so that I feel big? Because the Banalsos wants to climb the ladder. And it's one of the ways that you can most tell what's in somebody's character is what do they do when you hand them tools like this. But the danger is you just handed them a tool like that. God knows what they're going to do with it, right? You don't want to hand, you know, nukes to a narcissist con artist because the way you may find out he's a narcissist con artist is when he nukes everybody. There you want to titrate the level of power that you offer people as a test to find out what they're like. And philosophy, Nietzsche is saying, can be extraordinarily dangerous. I mean, it is so easy for someone without a philosophical bone in their body to take the tools of philosophy and use them as a weapon against everybody around them and get no further enlightenment of them. So we see this in the Banausic reduction of philosophy to sophistry, manipulation, and zero-sum thinking, especially. It's playing intrinsic worth games. Who's worth going back for, especially if it's not actually happening and you're not actually put in that situation. With Douloy and Banalsoy, it merely postures as an Aristos. But I'm going to talk us through the way you can distinguish that from actual heuristic behavior to the best of my ability to describe what that would be like. And of course, none of us really knows. And Aristo sees their relationship with Duloi and Benausoi not as dismissive, not as exploitative, but as a sacred responsibility. It's like if you're a doctor and someone walks into your office and they need insulin, they have problems, their kidneys have problems, they have diabetes. A Benalsos looks at that as somebody to exploit. What can I get out of this? Now I have their weakness. How can, boy, I wonder how much could I charge for this insulin? What could I, maybe I can blackmail them and get them to do things for me. This is how Benalsos thinks. How do I get on top of this? And the doulos, like, so the Benalsos isn't even seeing the person that's in front of them. They're seeing a thing that has a value, a game that has rules. The doulos is only seeing their own feelings and experiences. They might be able to help if they care about it, or they might be angry at that person right now and withhold it just because they're in a bad mood. And then later, after the guy dies, they might feel bad about that and wish they'd given it to him. The roller coaster of the doulos emotionally and experientially can be a problem. But the Aristos has essentially taken an oath that says, I am dealing with all of these people, and many of them are they're larval, they're ill-formed. They it might be that they're sick, it might just be that they're young or young at heart and haven't yet grown up. We don't know necessarily. But this is it is the reason Aristoi exists, according to this Greek existentialist philosophy, is to provide this function within society. Somebody has to care about more than winning. Somebody has to care about how can we be healthy together? How can we succeed? And this is the fundamental Greek concern we've talked about before, how can we replace the chaos of everybody against everybody else with a cosmos in which competition and cooperation are balanced together into a dialectic, right? So you still get the advantages of competition, but not competition to the point that we destroy ourselves or break ourselves up into a chaos. This is the role of the Aristos, is to cultivate these kinds of relationships among people. And it is a sacred duty. They see it as a political duty. They see it as a religious duty. They see the gods as involved in this. So here's the issue. Although we each have a duty to cultivate ourselves to the best of our ability, and we talked about that before, the duty and the responsibility, we have, and this is a critical point, each of us has no control over how benighted we start out in life. Some people get launched better than others. Some people get launched worse. And that's not the individual's fault. That it has nothing to do with their agency. It's contingency. The roll of the dice. Stephen talks about this, right? Some acorns are going to have a great time. They're going to land at exactly the right place and get all the water and sunlight they need, and good for them. It's going to be easy for them to become an oak. A lot of other acorns, they are going to be given a much harder road to hoe. And some of them aren't going to make it. But if we move beyond zero-sum thinking, we're going to realize there's a bunch of other acorns that might make it or might not make it. It all depends on the circumstances.
Hamlet's outrageous fortunes.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Exactly. And it's those in-between ones that are the critical duty of the Aristoi. Trying to figure out, can this acorn be saved? What should this acorn be saved? What can we do with it? What is its potential? How do you garden in here? Is this an invasive weed, or is this something that's going to make everything better for everybody else? You don't know, but it's nevertheless your responsibility. And the reason it's your responsibility is because Dula and Banalso are incapable of carrying out that responsibility. Their character makes it impossible for them to look at these, using Phil's term, these equivocating situations, these in-between situations, and judging what the right thing is to do. So we have no control over how benighted we start out, nor, and this is a critical point, even for people who get the best start possible, nor do we have control over how far we can develop. There may be limits, intrinsic limits of character that are locked into us by genetics. They might be locked into us because our upbringing set us on the wrong path at an early stage of development, and now there's no going back. This is just part of our character now. It could be other factors. The Greeks saw this, and Kenneth talks about this. They saw this as one of the great mysteries of the human condition. We certainly haven't addressed it yet. Nobody knows the full extent of how and why a character is structured the way it is. And nobody knows the full extent of how malleable character may prove to be. We know that character is not static. We know that it's dynamic. And we know that its changes are partly based on what happens to you over and over in your life. And they're partly based on the character's own inner laws of growth. The hidden laws of growth of character are a topic that's going to come up over and over in this paper, right? This is that thing. Some acorns are, are going to have a challenge. They might make it, but they're going to have a challenge that's in their genes. It's just intrinsically in there. Maybe they were going to grow into a sapling that needs a lot more light. And God help them if they land in the shadow, if that's the case. All right, so there's a bunch of these factors, and the question is, how do you relate to those differences? A doulos looks at differences emotionally and experientially, which can take various intense but parochial forms. It's hard to predict. But now so are more predictable. They look at differences exploitatively, as permission to con and manipulate and bully. And even when they're benign banausoi, they still look at differences algorithmically. They have some ideology that tells them how to interpret the world. These are the boxes I have, and I'm going to make sure every damn thing fits in one of these boxes. Even if these are the wrong boxes, a priori, the Banausos cannot believe he's got the wrong boxes. He's going to try to force everybody to fit into one of his recipes that he's got stuck in his head. That's a good Banausos. A bad Banausos is just going to say, how can I screw this person over and climb on top of them? So, and Aristos understands that what they're dealing with is parenting and nurturing and gardening, right? If you're in a resource constrained situation, like in my backyard, I have planter boxes, and there's only so much room in those planter boxes. I can't grow as many lettuces as are going to sprout in there. I don't plant lettuces. They just grow in there because I let them bolt every year. Piles of seeds. This is Stephen's metaphor, right? I'm sure he recognizes this. I'm applying it to lettuce now. It's true. It's in my backyard in this garden box. Piles of lettuces grow up every year because every year I let them grow tall like you're not supposed to do so that they'll flower. They bolt and then the flowers develop seeds and the seeds fall all over these flower boxes. And then the next year I don't have to buy any seeds. I don't have to do anything. They just sprout up. But what I do have to do is I have to weed that box. There's not room for all those lettuces. I can't do it. It's a resource constrained situation. And it's my job to evaluate the lettuces and figure out which ones have the best chance in there and to protect those at the expense of the others.
What if Monsanto has their way?
Yeah, screw those guys. Terminator seeds, what a delightful technology. So it's also my responsibility to recognize the difference between my garden box and a huge pasture. If I treat the huge pasture like a garden box and say, I'm sorry, I have to weed the shit out of all these lettuces because I'm the kind of guy, I make the tough choices, and what I do is I pull up most of the lettuces. But there's plenty of room. There's actually no need for me to be doing that. They can spread to their heart's content. I have all kinds of room. But if I treat that as a resource constrained situation when it's not, I'm not behaving like an Aristos. I'm behaving like a Banausos. I've learned the rules of the resource constrained game and I'm applying them whether they're applicable or not. You see the difference? The Aristos has to be willing to put aside the zero sum games and the algorithms. He keeps them on a shelf, he keeps them within reach, but he knows their weaknesses and he knows his own noetic tendency to want to overly systematize and pattern everything. But the cosmos is bigger than our patterns. Sometimes our patterns apply and sometimes they don't. The Banausos doesn't want to admit that and is going to try to turn everything into a zero sum game. And the Aristos is going to say, I need to keep my brain alive to the actual circumstances in front of me and then decide which of my recipes might apply. Or do I even have one? Maybe I'm just going to have to make it up as I go along and document what I did, and that becomes a new recipe. One size fits all. The Procrustean bed is one of the signs of a Banausos. So this is that issue that Donald was talking about of taste, judgment. right? Which comes up a lot. Does Kenneth Smith not say judgment and taste every other paragraph? It's one of his critical issues. And as I'm coming to understand as I'm doing my deep dive on Hannah Arendt, he gets some of that from her. She's relentlessly talking about judgment versus taste and so forth. It's going to come up in this very paper. So an Aristos looks at the differences and understands them not as something to exploit, because the Aristos is not afraid of the differences between people. The Aristos understands that there's challenges in the differences between people, and sometimes those challenges matter, and sometimes they don't. And it's going to try to remain alive to when they apply and when they don't. But regardless, the Aristos's role is of a parent, a nurturer, a gardener. So you make the hard choices for the health of this whole system. You don't make the hard choices just because it makes you feel like a man. You don't do them when you don't have to. You do them when you need to. It's a totally different thing. And there's something else that Aristos understands. They understand that not only can no one know themselves fully, I mean, Heraclitus does not mince words about this. So you could search your whole life in just your own character and still not get to the bottom of it. Anybody who thinks, oh yeah, I know myself, well, they obviously don't. Only someone who doesn't know themselves would say, I totally know myself. That's the kind of arrogance that no human being is entitled about themselves. That's why they put know thyself right there on the oracle. Everybody has to read it. It's not like they bring it out for some people and not others. The smartest, wisest, most introspective person in the world is still confronted with, no, you don't know yourself. Keep digging, right? I mean, Socrates is clear about this. Heraclitus is clear about this. No one can know themselves fully, but far more so. And this is where we go to the guy falling off the ship problem. No one can know someone else fully. We don't understand other people half so well as we think we do. We don't even understand them 1% as well as we think we do. We are full of confidence about categorizing and dismissing other people. And a Banalsos or a Doulos will lean into that and say, yes, I'm so smart. I have everybody pegged. I know who's worthless and who's not. I think here about The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. One of the most brilliant parts of Lord of the Rings is that they have the opportunity to kill Gollum pretty early on. And Frodo actually asks, why did Bilbo stay his hand? Why didn't he stab that monster Gollum when he had the chance in the dark? When he held Sting in his hand, he was right there. He could have done it. And he's been nothing but problems ever since. And you remember what Gandalf says? He says, don't be so hasty to dish out death because you can't dish out life. And if you only dish out death because that's the thing you know how to do, you cease to be a gardener. You cease to be a force for good in the world. You only become a problem who's killing people. And as a mortal, he doesn't say all these words, but it's all implied. As a mortal, we make mistakes. So what do you want to be screwing up? What do you want to be botching? Do you want to be killing innocents? Oops, sorry, I thought you were a bad guy. Or do you want to stay your hand? And he says one of the reasons to stay your hand is no one can know someone else fully. We don't know Smeagol's whole story. And in the end, Smeagol might turn out to be important to our victory over Sauron. Gandalf essentially says this. And if you know how the story ends, it is one of the most brilliant endings ever. That Frodo perseveres and perseveres and perseveres and finally can't climb up Mount Doom. And he needs Sam to pick him up and carry him up the mountain because he's Frodo's given everything he's got. He doesn't have anything else. So, first of all, there's that you can come to the end of your resources and not make it and still not be a bad person or an inadequate person. That's just the human condition. But second of all, once they're there inside Mount Doom at the place where the ring has to be cast in, because Frodo is so exhausted and has given everything, he has nothing left to fight the temptation of the ring. And instead of casting the ring in, he puts it on his finger. And if there weren't Gollum, at that moment, everything would have gone to shit forever in Middle Earth, right? I mean, it's the evil ring and it's got him and he's possessed by it. And now he has the power. And Sauron is freaking out at that moment. And go, he's sending his Nazgul on their flying winged beasts. He's like, oh crap, somebody else is the master of the ring all of a sudden. But in that moment, Gollum, who we've dismissed the whole time as this jerk who's so selfish and bestial and blah, 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 flips out because of his love for the ring. And he tackles Frodo and bites it off his hand. And Frodo's returned to his sanity, minus a finger. And Gollum, dancing around with glee because finally, after all these decades, he's got his ring back, falls off and drops into the lava. And that's the end of the ring. It's an accident driven by character. And it's the same character. This is part of what Tolkien's brilliant at, what most writers aren't that good at. In that final moment, there is nothing that Smeagol does that isn't 100% in character with the way that we met him way back in The Hobbit in the beginning. It is in character for him to do that thing at that time. But, and maybe Gandalf could see that, but we, the readers, back in the first book, when Frodo's lamenting, why didn't Bilbo stab him? Gandalf senses this issue, this Greek issue of character, and says, there are hidden laws of growth within each of us, and we can't predict how they're going to manifest in the world. So it's not that we shouldn't kill anybody. I mean, do they not kill hordes of orcs and goblins and wargs? And they do, but they're cautious about dishing it out willy-nilly, and they hold back and stay their hand at a pivotal moment. So this is a nuanced position on the death penalty, right? It's not that they don't kill anybody, but that there's a lot of boundary cases that where they stay their hand and say, we can't yet see how this is going to manifest. So somebody falls overboard and we say, oh, that's a negligible person. They're of no import whatsoever. If you go back and study the history of geniuses, you're going to find a lot of people who at some point in their life looked like somebody of no importance whatsoever. They were negligible. But later, their hidden laws of growth developed them into somebody the world really needed. And if we just thrown them under the bus earlier, we never would have had that from them. There's a use, this is a Banausic calculative way of explaining this, but there is a powerful use value in not dismissing people or thinking that you know them before you do. Stephen, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Well, certainly one of the big ones in the recent world, in the workforce today, it's very cutthroat, even for the simplest people. Well, it used to be cutthroat for the people at the top, but now it's cutthroat for the people at the bottom as well. So, of course, they're trying to get everything they can out of people, and if they're not getting enough, they'll just say next. And of course, it's an anti-Christian element in modern society. The Christian value was that everybody, even the lowest, has some element of value, or that person was created by God, therefore there must be a value there, even if they don't seem to be much. But that's not the world now. The world now's operating on a different metric. The sort of metric that started to blossom in the 1980s, with Gordon Gekko. Thank you.
It's an excellent point, Stephen. Yeah, and that's for sure where Tolkien got it. Right? He was in the club with C.S. Lewis. He was a devoted Christian. And he's even though there's no Jesus figure per se in the land of the Lord of the Rings, he's definitely trying to depict that ethos, that issue that only God can see our true worth. Only God can see into and comprehend our characters. For human beings, it's uncertain. And this is why, judge not lest you be judged. We don't know what all's in there in anybody. So the simplest solution is start with the default of don't throw anybody under the bus. It's like there may be circumstances where you make exceptions, and the Aristos is expected to develop the taste and judgment required to know when you have to make an exception. But if you don't have to make an exception in a particular situation, you don't. You say don't throw them under the bus. If you see this as well in military units, small military units, teams, strike forces, never leave anybody behind. Never. Right? If you can, keep the organism together, heal the organism, help it to grow back. And that's what an organism does, right? I mean, the amphibians that grow back their limbs, they don't just chop off the limb and say, well, I could grow it back, but that sounds like a lot of work, so screw that leg. They say, no, if I can be whole, I want to be whole. I want to heal as much as I can. So this is that issue of cosmos versus chaos, which is so important to the Greeks. So if you're looking at a potential Darwin Award candidate, and you dislike, how dumb they're behaving, the problem is that you don't know whether they're permanently benighted or whether you're catching them on a really bad day or whether they're in the process of growing up. Maybe that is what they're like a lot right now, but they're growing up and they're going to become somebody different. We just don't know. There is this huge element of having to accept the limits of our understanding about each other. So this is why the Greeks say, count no man happy until he's died. They're not just being pessimistic. They're saying, what they're saying is, we have been recounting the history of the Greeks for centuries. And one of the things that we note is you never really fully know if someone is a great hero to admire or a terrible figure to be disposed of until the final act of their life, because people have a tendency of popping out with surprises. I mean, yes, people tend to be true to their character. They tend to be true to what we perceive their character to be, and frequently nothing changes from until nothing unexpected occurs until they die. But too many times, the Greeks say, we thought we had somebody's number, and then they did the exact opposite. Someone we thought was loyal and faithful betrayed his own polis and ran off to the enemy. And they're like, where the hell did that come from? And the answer is, it was in his character. The right circumstance came up to let that part of his character come out. And we were all wrong about what his character was because that circumstance had never come up. That part of him never got a chance to express itself. And the reverse happens. People who you would have just completely written off as worthless or a shithead can totally change the day. Remember, in Lord of the Rings, Frodo is the equivalent of hobbit nobility. He's educated. His uncle is wealthy. He lives in the finest halls in Bag End. He speaks Elvish. He reads and writes and speaks Elvish. He's a polyglot genius. So of course we think the story is going to mainly be about him. But if it was entirely up to him, he would have failed twice. Wouldn't have made it up Mount Doom, and then would have put the ring on, or would have kept the ring on and been a horrible person. It was Sam. It was the lumpen the lumpen proletariat, doulos, slave-minded, master. I don't know about those things. I'm just a gardener, right? I'm just sitting here trimming your hedges, man. I don't know nothing about no Nazgul. I mean, the way we first see him appear in the Fellowship of the Ring, he's not just a working class guy, but he's a lower level working class guy. He's ignorant. But Tolkien teaches us through the course of the story that despite the fact of his circumstances, he has a good character, an exceptional character. He's loyal when other people are tempted, and he persists when other people collapse and fail. That strength within him is necessary to the victory in the end. Yeah, Marxist critique of Hobbit society. That's a whole other thing. This is a Greek characterological critique of Hobbit society. And Tolkien did that on purpose. That he made it take Frodo plus Sam plus Smeagol to get the ring over the finish line. All three of them. The one who seemed noble and seemed like a hero, the one who seemed ignoble and mediocre, and the one who seemed outright bad. He gave us the good, the bad, and the ugly, and showed us that in this story, it took all three. And the reason it took all three was because of contingency and the intersection between contingency and character, and that there's no way in advance. And this is one of Hannah Arendt's most pressing points about the nature of human history. There is no way in advance to predict that outcome. It can't be done. In Origins of Totalitarianism, she says, it is the biggest blunder of modern theories of history that they try to reduce history to a simple machine whose gears turn and it produces exactly what you expect it to produce. She says that is not at all how history works. That is how history works by default. But history is littered with natality, new people being born into the world who don't do what we expect them to do, who act according to their own character in those circumstances. And their character turns out to be different from everybody else's character. And so they do something nobody else does, and they change the course of history. She says this dialectic between agency and contingency, between the individual and the group, says you can't understand history without that. You can't understand the Holocaust without it. You can't understand the Stalinist purges in the Soviet Union without it. The individual characters of the individual people intersected with the course of history to make these things happen. And that's the lesson that Tolkien is teaching us. And this is what I didn't say last week, which is why I'm putting this prefatory caution in here. This is a correction to what I said last week. You can't let yourself be tempted into thinking that we're doing characterological mathematics. It's way too complicated for that. So, character includes its own hidden laws of growth. It's obscure, it's hidden from us. We have to, if we want to become Aristoi, and I don't know if we can, it's a recurring point Kenneth makes. This is the modern era, and everything is stacked against us. If we have the potential to become Aristoi, if we want to become Aristoi, one of the things that we have to watch out for is we have to learn to overcome the temptation to sneer and bully and dismiss those who we imagine to be our inferiors. If you say human character organizes into these three basic types, the douloi, the banausoi, and the aristoi, and that the banausoi are better than the douloi and the aristoi are better than the banausoi, then everybody's going to want to be an aristos because modernity is a big social climbing banausic structure. And because everybody wants to be an aristos and everybody thinks that the way you social climb is by standing on somebody else's head, right? This is the zero sum banausic thinking. Then everybody's going to run around accusing everybody else of being douloi and banausoi, won't they? I mean, of course they will. I mean, if we the whole the water heats up and the crabs try to escape the pot by climbing on each other's backs. I mean, sometimes crabs do that and sometimes they don't. But Banausoi always do that. And a civilization that has been so Banausified as modernity is going to be full of these not only other people doing it, but in ourselves, we will have unexamined reflexes to want to sneer and dismiss and bully, to not be our best selves, to not do the prudent, even to the point of not doing the prudent, expedient, pragmatic, utilitarian thing. It becomes a reflex to try to posture. I mean, after all, in the market, if you don't posture, you don't get hired. The guy who postures most effectively gets hired. You know, the whole thing about how do you write your resume, your CV, what do you say during the interview? Everybody knows. On the one hand, you don't want to lie. But on the other hand, if you don't get hired, you're going to lose your house. And that puts people into this position of having an existential fear for their lives unless they figure out how to sell themselves. So you offer somebody a social ladder, or what they think is what they interpret as a social ladder, douloi, banausoi, aristoi, and in the modern world, and the modern reflex is, I must be an aristos. And to prove it, I'm going to sneer at all those other people. Look at all the Darwin Award winners. Look at all my inferiors. If only they were as cool as I am. And every bit of that is non-eristic. Not a, I mean, if you're a gardener, you don't sneer when your seed puts up a little sprout. You know, go, stupid sprout. You're not as big and strong as I am. But a Banausos might, right? Depending on where he's at emotionally. This is that thing we have to watch out for in ourselves. Donald, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Oh, you're reminding me. I attended one of Kenneth's seminars years ago on characterology, which took up this kind of material. And as there was a group of about 8 of us, and we all went to lunch together. And as we walked out to get in a car, one of the group says, well, it's a good thing we're all aristos, or aristoi. And Kenneth, you've heard Kenneth. He does that kind of harumph, just makes that sort of guttural noise. And that was all his comment. It's like, yeah, we're all aristoi, sure. Pretty clear. Not only are we not, we're not we're not there. It's not close. It's not like we're almost there. It's like we don't even know how big the gap is, just like you said. We're not in a society where we can judge how we might be, but yeah, we're all Aristoi. Good. Last word on that one.
Exactly. Exactly right. And it's why it's so important to remind ourselves, lest our heads swell, right? I mean, what does Nietzsche say? Man is a problem that must be overcome. That means all of us, right? Not that all those other people have to be overcome and I am the Ubermensch, right? I mean, the whole point of the phrase Ubermensch is it's something better than people are. And we're people, so that's not us. The moment some Nazi says, "Oh, I'm the Ubermensch," there's Nietzsche laughing in his grave, going, "You just disproved your own thesis." The Ubermensch would never say, "Behold, here I am, the best of the best." That's what a Benausos does. Look at me climbing the social ladder. You're all like ants from up here. Ha ha ha! I win. You know, you see Calvin and Hobbes when he builds these little towns, and then he becomes a monster and stomps his way through them and knocks them all down. That's Dulick Banausic, I'm the winner and you're the loser kind of thinking. Ooh, Harry Lime. Yeah, nice, Stephen. Yeah, that's not heuristic thinking. Heuristic thinking is what the hell kind of mess are we in and what's our path forward from here? How many of these saplings and acorns can be saved? I don't know if you guys have ever seen. There's a animated film out there, and there's a book behind it called "The Man Who Planted Trees." How many of you have seen "The Man Who Planted Trees"? Oh, you are in for a treat. If you like Hayao Miyazaki's anime, if you like, Carol Ballard's nature films like The Black Stallion or Duma or Fly Away Home, you're gonna love The Man Who Planted Trees. It is a very quiet animated story based on a book, and it's supposedly set in France in the Highlands in a very sterile part of the world where everything is dried out and sere. And once long ago, there used to be happy towns, but now they're mostly abandoned. And the ones that are left, everybody's cranky and bitter and they fight all the time and nothing grows. And this guy is on vacation. He's passing through and he's surprised when he comes to this country and sees how harsh it is. And then out in the middle of nowhere, he meets an old hermit who doesn't say much. And he lives alone with his dog in a cabin. And he decides to spend a few days with the hermit because he's so struck by the guy and how different he is. And the guy goes out every day and he collects old dried acorns from the dust all over the place. And he brings them home and he tests them and knocks on them. And some of them now we're in Stephen territory. He figures out some of them you just can't save, right? And he sets those aside. But some of them, as bad as they look, they might be salvageable. And then he goes out with 100 acorns every day and he plants them. And over the course of the story, he reconstructs the lost French forest that once grew there, and it changes everything. The water comes back because the roots are pulling it up from deep in the earth, and birds move back in, flowers and other plants grow in around the trees. The shade lowers the temperature. The towns where the forest reaches start to regenerate, and people become kinder because life isn't so harsh and awful. They're able to relax a little bit and take care of each other. And he talks about how amazing it is that this quiet man with no ideology and no propaganda, no ego, living this quiet, simple life by himself is gradually transforming this space. And he's describing a kind of introverted version of Aristeia, right? Where the guy looks at the world's problems and says, what of this can I take responsibility for and do something about? How do I make a difference in the world? And the guy's not running around telling everybody, look how cool I am. Give me an award. Make me your mayor. Give me lots of money. He's not trying to social climb. He's just trying to fix what's broken and cultivate the humanity. He recognizes that the people in these towns can't be good. There's not enough water, there's not enough food. They've been reduced to zero-sum squabbling. And now they think that's all life can be. And you can't convince them with arguments. But, oak forests grow up around them. Acorns are abundant. Food becomes abundant again. And the reality of their situation convinces them more effectively than any argument or ideology or dogma could possibly do. This is the mindset, right? Yeah, under difficult circumstances. So one of the very first tests for a potential Aristos, if you wanted to move in an heuristic direction, it's how do you treat your inferiors? How do you treat people who can do nothing for you? Are they just something to climb on the backs of and exploit? Or are you going to take some responsibility? Say, what, if anything, can be made from these people that will be healthier than where they're at now? How can we improve things? So this is a test no banal cells can pass because their drive to treat people as things, as resources, is inexorable. Their character does not permit them. And this is something that Kenneth talks about extensively in this paper. To the Aristos, the world of principles and values is alive and authoritative and visible to them. But to the hoi polloi, to the douloi and banausoi, those things don't exist. Nobody has a character. The banausos may say the word character, and they may even define it for you, but they don't believe in character. Not really. They think everything is what it seems to be to them. Everything is what they can use it for. And that includes everybody. And that's all there is to the world. So they can't believe in principles. They can't believe in values. Those are just things that you brand yourself with in order to get an advantage. So this is a kind of, I'm down to my last 2 points on my first prefatory caution, the one that's mine. We'll turn after this to Kenneth's prefatory caution. Although we can learn something about human character by studying the character of an acorn, and it's a valuable metaphor for character, because that acorn does not look at all like an oak, at all. It's not like a miniature oak that grows into a giant oak. There's not just growth, but transformation, metamorphosis that takes place. And we can see that it's driven by a hidden inner law of development. And that's character. That's ethos. Although we can learn that, it is a dualic or banausic blunder to treat a human being as an acorn. Because we're not. We're a different species. We have a different reproductive strategy. We don't throw thousands of young out into the world and hope for the best. Corals do that. Fishes do that. We do not do that, right? There is an enormous complexity inside of people, and you can't predict what you're going to get. And that's the heuristic perspective. Know the limits of the metaphor and don't let it own you. And finally, I wrap up my part of the prefatory caution with a quote by Stephen Jay Gould from The Panda's Thumb, More Reflections in Natural History. If you haven't read any Stephen Jay Gould, you should. The man is a brilliant essay writer. He loves that art where you start an essay by describing two things that seem to have nothing whatsoever to do with each other. And then over the course of just a few pages, it turns out that they have everything to do with each other. And the thing could never have happened without the other thing. And then none of us knew that. None of us knew the connections between these things. And that's how he writes about biology, evolution, ecology, you name it. It's very interesting. So in The Panda's Thumb, he's doing a thing about Einstein's brain and the ways people have tried to measure intelligence from the outside. And they do volume, number of convolutions, all these tricks that they do. And how disappointed everyone's been because there actually isn't anything particularly interesting physically about Einstein's brain, despite all the effort that's been put into it. And he culminates by saying, I am somehow less interested in the weight and convolutions of Einstein's brain than in the near certainty that people of equal talent have lived and died in cotton fields and sweatshops. This is the Greek perspective. Aristotle is absolutely explicit about this. He says the defect in our political economy and our social systems is that we think we know people's worth, and we jam them into roles in society without regard to their true character. And thus we end up being ruled by idiots, and we end up holding as slaves people who are actually our superiors. There's a mix. We have not assigned roles to people according to their character. This is Aristotle's position about the Greeks. We've only claimed we did to justify our rulership. But some of those of us who are ruling are complete idiots. We would be better off in the fields right? Because we can't be trusted with anything else. You put us in charge and we exploit. We don't understand what people are for. We don't understand human nature. We don't understand ourselves. So we shouldn't be in charge. Somebody whose someone who only looks at children, in a pedophilic way should not be a babysitter. This is not hard to draw this conclusion if you think from the ancient perspective. But if you think from the modern perspective, everybody should be given a chance because we're all the same. There is no character. There's no such thing as character in the modern world. And thus we make laws that say anybody can be president, anybody can be babysitter. We are so allergic to ad hominems that we become blind to who people actually are. And from that, we get massive injustice. And this is Stephen Jay Gould's point. Who could have been the next Mozart? Well, there's been a lot of people since Mozart who were, in fact, the next Mozart, Camille Saint-Saëns. There's plenty of them. But who could be the next person to discover? Who's going to discover how to regenerate limbs? Who's going to discover the cure for pancreatic cancer? Well, good luck. They just did that this year. If go Google the new treatment for pancreatic cancer. It's amazing because that one was just a killer. It used to be if you caught it, you're dead. My neighbor died of that. By the time you find it, it's too late. And yet now they've got something like 80+% success rate in stopping it. Somebody discovered that. And what if that person, had been digging ditches instead? Everybody'd still die of pancreatic cancer. We wouldn't be able to do anything about that. This is the problem. The Greeks want you to create a society in which you fit people to their potential, so that the culture can benefit from the varied random assortment of gifts that evolution hands out in ways that we can't predict and can't sometimes perceive. This is Gould's point. We have people in the wrong places doing the wrong things, and the result is an injustice. According to Aristotle, the result is an unjust society. And a Banalsos thinks that's great, because the Banalsos doesn't care about justice. He only cares about winning. But an Aristos sees that there is a massive problem in doing that, and it has to be corrected. And therefore, the Aristos is very cautious about evaluating the worth of other people. Stephen, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
This thing you're pointing out earlier, Dave was pointing out, wasn't it, about, Kierkegaard, take life as it comes. I think Kierkegaard was making the point that life is unpredictable. There's elements that are uncertain. Now, what's important about that is we know the class of rationalists who would like to make life absolutely certain. Everything must happen as I predicted. I don't want anything that's unpredictable. Now, you've been making a point about character. It's in uncertainty that character is revealed. If everything goes exactly according to plan, that's not going to reveal the inner depths of character. The character will remain hidden. But when things that are unpredictable happen, that's when character reveals itself. Thank you.
That's brilliant, Stephen. Right on. The more we structure society to make it uniform, the less we create opportunities to discover who people really are. If everybody is taught exactly the same, obviously we need a whole bunch in common for us to understand each other and have a culture. But if everything's in common and we all get exactly the same education, we'll never find Mozart. Right? It's never going to happen. If we want Mozart to emerge, or Florence Price, or any of the other really great composers who came from unexpected places, the only way we're going to find that is to have a variety of possible experiences. And children's upbringing has to be a dialectic between some standard parts of the education and some playful, random, unpredictable parts, to create more opportunities for the spark to catch fire and for us to go, hey, something's burning there. Do you think that guy might have something? Maybe he does. Jason talks about this in the comments. Meritocracy is a continuation of Aristoi. And it's the ideal of a meritocracy is basically what Aristotle is arguing for in the Politics. He's saying that's the way society should be structured. And Kenneth is going to be making this argument throughout this paper. And when he talks about Aristoi and modernity, which is the theme of this whole interlude, this is what he's talking about. It's like Aristoi are naturally produced seemingly randomly, the potential for them by our genetics. And whether they emerge or don't emerge has a lot to do with opportunity. You can make a society that tries to create those opportunities, like Stephen's talking about, try to create a certain randomness so that contingency can vary enough that you can find varied parts of people's characters that they'll emerge. And if that happens, then the next thing the Greeks say you have to have is you have to have a community of Aristoi who can, as Donald says, lead by examples. These potential Aristoi can follow them around and figure out what is it like to live the life of an Aristos, because you have to see it to believe it. It's an organism of character. It's not like a rule set. And you have to see the whole organism working together. That would create potentially the kind of meritocracy that Jason's talking about and that Aristotle talks about. The problem is that the guy who coined the word meritocracy meant it the other way around. He wrote a book called Rise of the Meritocracy, and it's about how mediocre people want everyone to think that they're the best. And so they create all these systems where they hand awards to other mediocre people and make sure that actual exceptional people are excluded. Because the last thing in the world they want is to go head to head against a Mozart. They don't want that. They don't want Mozart to win. So they try to make sure Mozart ends up in an insane asylum and, some dude guy gets to win the great award on the greatest musician of all time. This is
Sounds like Sony.
Yes. So Rise of the Meritocracy, the definition of a meritocracy is a fake meritocracy. He says there might, it'd be nice if there were real ones, but the only ones we see in the real world are people creating fake, cheap meritocracies that pretend to be while actually betraying all of the principles of a meritocracy. So just Jason's actually said something even doubly profound, right? Because a genuine meritocracy would be a continuation of the Aristoi. And to be clear, a genuine meritocracy would also permit douloi to live the fullest lives they can. Douloi are not all clones of each other. Same with a banausoi. You could have good banausoi, you could have bad banausoi. There could be a whole range of possibilities for how each of these character types expresses itself in a person. And in a meritocracy, you would make sure that the healthiest and the most, sane members of each of these classes could rise to the top of their class. That would be a meritocracy. So it's not just a fulfillment of the Aristoi, but a fulfillment of all three character types. But if instead you create what the modern world has, which is a fake meritocracy, which is designed to exclude the Aristoi, so nobody now is cultivating society for its own benefit. They're all cultivating it for their own advantage. And then to mimic or ape a meritocracy, they set up these fake meritocracies where they could say, look at my long list of awards. Aren't I the best? It's like, yeah, but you were given those awards by other mediocre people and you're a mediocre person and you excluded everybody who could beat you from the competition. So what good are your fake trophies? Now you're talking modernity from Kenneth Smith's position. And this is one of the mechanisms by which Aristoi get suppressed and excluded. Ari, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Hey, I want to make sure everybody hear me coming in. Okay, good. So I want to build on this explicitly. I think I'm basically going to say the exact same thing. It sounds like you guys are saying, but from to some degree, Michael Sandel's language and also Jonathan Sachs's language on meritocracy, which is basically that a meritocracy is this idea that the winners win and the losers lose, and then the winners win more, and then the losers lose more, and essentially you get a this inequality in society. And then you get this problem that people think that they're winners because they're destined to be winners, as opposed to, no, you're on the backs winning and you have more resources. It's like you're playing poker. It's like if you're playing with I like the joke here. If you're playing poker in the Olympics based on what your country is worth, the United States is coming in and be like, oh, we get to, to go against some little guy. It's like, oh, you just limped in the small blind. It's not real merit if you have a gazillion more resources to throw at the problem. And so what happens is that in a meritocracy, it essentially prevents future meritocracy, is what we're saying here. And a real meritocracy would all be about maintaining or creating future meritocracy, which means you have to create a system that is going to promote future merit based on the uncertainty kind of that exactly like Stephen was saying, that you need you need this opportunity to be available for others. And if the people who are the merit winners take all the opportunity for future merit, then you have no meritocracy in the future. I don't know if I went too fast or weird in this way, but it's like, it's something that it crowds out the actual potential for future merit. If the people now who are holding on to the resources because they won everything, they are now, there's no opportunity for any future merit to happen. And so Michael Sandel's point is generally that meritocracy just leads to high inequalities and then society breakdown. And what happens is the rich, this is Jonathan Sachs's version of this, is that the rich, when they get super rich and society starts to not do so well, they just check out. They just live in their ivory towers. The rich become detached or irresponsible. And then what happens is the poor become hopeless. And I feel like you're getting to this hopeless state is more like Hannah Arendt and totalitarianism when there's a whole bunch of people that are thrown away and they recognize that they're being thrown away and there's nothing they can do about it. And the people at the top are claiming like, oh yeah, this is a merit-based society. And of course, we're the ones that are doing everything because we're great. And you losers, well, you're meant to lose. So just go ahead and lose. And on like, so that's the main idea about a meritocracy is, I think it's just, if anything, we have to redefine what a meritocracy is. A meritocracy is like a living organism that's able to reproduce more meritocracy, right? If you're a meritocracy now and you're just going to die and wither away, that's not a meritocracy. So it'd be about future, complexity being maintained, and then also the nuance of like in that then there needs to be a meritocracy, like you say, for the doula or the Banausite. Winning for the sake of winning should be great within a healthy framework. Living for the sake of like being in the fields, whatever it is. And then those people who are somehow aligned with that way of life can thrive naturally, but within limits. And similarly, like Aristoi also will thrive naturally within healthy limits. So this is all just a structural problem, but we don't know how to make that structure. And then the last point that I wanted to thought was the trap that I think the modern Aristoi often fall into that destroys their Aristotelic ability is they think, oh, well, I want to fix society. I want to help all these people beneath me. And I want to do all this thing. I want to be the acorn guy. But in order to do that, I got to win. In order to do that, I have to get a place I can win. And then what happens in the brain is the perceptions and everything change with all of the neurochemistry that now you're just paying attention to winning and you're no longer capable of being an Aristoi anymore. You got corrupted by the fact that, well, it was like, I think it's the classic idea. I started off in politics wanting to help. And then, but you get up in politics and you're doing all this corrupt stuff. You're like, well, don't hate the player, hate the game. And it's just, so anyways, I feel like the modern trap for the Aristoi, there's many modern traps. Or maybe there's only a few, but of categories. But let's say there's many. But one of the main modern traps that I see a lot of my friends fall into is like, I want to help society, so I'm going to win. And then they don't care about helping society anymore. They just need to win. And like, what happened to the old guy who cared about society? Like, like, oh, that stuff is for losers. Look at no ladies pay attention to that. No, they're guys. You can't get any research. Like, it's like, okay, great, okay, yeah. Anyways, that was enough. Yeah.
Yes, what's part of the reason that there aren't any functional Aristoi. There's a lot of reasons, and Kenneth's going to talk about a bunch of them in this paper. He's going to talk about a bunch of them in the additional snippets that David's been collecting that we're going to start talking about next week. But among the reasons is that we are the most completely propagandized people who have ever lived in the history of the world. And we can be confident that that's true because we have science and industry, and they didn't. We can mass produce propaganda. We can mass produce education. We can mass produce information. And that gives us countless ways to inject ideologies into each and every one of us. I mean, I can't remember. There was a list of the people that everybody in the world knows. And like Superman's on the list and Mickey Mouse. It's like Disney's logo is on the list. People in the Amazon jungle know who Mickey Mouse is. We have been penetrated, and we are penetrated all day long with these same stories over and over and over that get into, even if we consciously dismiss them, they're in our unconscious. Anytime we're not paying attention to something, that unconscious programming slips out as the filler in between the 7 plus or minus 2 things that we consciously sculpted. And we're constantly, our actions and our thoughts are full of this Banausic propaganda. And one of the ways that you see it is in what you said. How easily do we slip from the idea of a meritocracy to the idea of there can be only one? right? That a meritocracy means there's one winner and everybody else is a loser. Ha ha, you all lose. That's not a meritocracy. But that's the shape that meritocracy is allowed to take in a Banausic ruled society. Because that's all the Banausoi want, is to be the one on top. They're just obsessed with the ladder and climbing. The idea that instead of being a single tree, it might be a forest. There might be a lot of hierarchies. And they might be hierarchies about different things. Like there's no one super doctor who's the best of all possible doctors. I mean, you'll see him in a Hollywood film, of course, just like the super programmer who can write in every language and hack every computer. Donald and I'm sure he has the same experience I do. We watch these movies that purport to be about hackers and we laugh and laugh and laugh because every computer evidently is written in the same language that just happens to be the one the hacker knows. The truth is there are over 1,000 programming languages. Nobody knows all those languages. Nobody can know all those languages. And even if you don't know the language, you don't know how it was put together into an application. You know what? These are extraordinarily complicated situations, but we can't imagine the idea of 1,000 hierarchies. Maybe there is somebody who's the best C programmer. Maybe there is somebody who's the best JavaScript programmer. Maybe there is somebody who's the best COBOL programmer. But there's no one person, which it's unlikely, Donald and I would agree, but it's possible. But what's not possible is for there to be one great programmer to rule them all. I mean, that's some Sauron thinking right there, right? That's Banausic thinking. And that's why when we hear the concept of a meritocracy, so many of us immediately convert it into a single giant hierarchy with one winner and everybody else loses. The Banausea is in us. We're marinating in it, right? It's like the old commercial. Your hands are soaking in it, right? Is it Palmolive? I can't remember which dish soap it was. You're soaking in it. It's reassuring. That's us. We're marinating in all of this acculturation every moment of our lives. And we don't know the extent to which all of these ideologies are tugging and pulling our thoughts off track. Wherever we were trying to think about, they're pulling it to fit the track of the ideology as best they can, unconsciously. It's being yanked around. And the way ideologies work is not only does the yanking occur, so does the inability to notice that we've missed the mark, that we're now aiming for a completely different target. The ideology tells us, oh, that's just as good. In fact, better, right? It's like there was no change. Shh, you can't see it. So yeah, hierarchies, meritocracies, zero-sum games, all of this stuff that is the poison of the modern world, it's all the Banausic mindset. We've all been Banausified, massively Banausified. And Banausea has its advantages, but not if it's in charge. It cannot govern. And Kenneth's going to talk about why in this paper. Donald, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Somehow, the Aristos is not the master of all trades. He has his skills or her skills too. And Kenneth has referred to them, this ruthless self-examination, the ruthless subjection of all ideas, proposals, and whatever, to examination, the ability to overcome the idiotic, the idiotic tendencies that are in all people, that my children are special. I want to take care of mine, whether it's my village, my block, my neighborhood, my house, my whatever, what I view as that's what they overcome. I don't think Kenneth ever suggests that Aristos are better carpenters or better plumbers, or like the common example. I think Aristotle is the guy that makes pots, ceramic pots. They're always, or the stonemason. All these examples are from Greek society. Making pots and making things out of stone were very useful skills. And the Aristos, what they contributed to that is, how do they think that works? That he has an image of what he's going to produce, how, they provide a certain critical understanding to how techne in general might proceed in the world, what its sort of metaphysical foundations might be. But I don't think Socrates ever made a pot. I'm pretty sure Aristotle never made a pot or carved stone or anything like that. That wasn't the role. And you know, the a modern meritocracy, particularly one dominated by Banausoi, would be based on what do they call it now? Where certificates. It wouldn't be based on what Arendt calls true authority. The guy who made it to the top would have the most pieces of paper to show he got there, to show he deserved to be there. I'm a little older than you, Rick. When I began programming, there weren't computer science majors. I mean, there were people that had math degrees or some kind of engineering degrees that for one reason or another got into programming, and some of the mentors from my youth, they had absolutely no pieces of paper. They had no way of this public thing that shows, it's like in The Wizard of Oz. You just don't have a diploma, but I'll give you one. And now you can be a great thinker. But they had personal authority. They had, by doing work, shown that they could do that work excellently. And they were the ones you wanted to pay attention to. The ones that's how you learned to be a programmer. It was sort of like trade school, you found yourself not an Aristoi, but you found yourself an authoritative programmer, and you studied their code, helped, worked with them, whatever. And that would be a meritocracy where the people the layer that rises to the top, not the pinnacle at the top of the pyramid, but the cream floating on the milk, would be people who had authority, who had, through their own actions, their own development of themselves. And I think I should never try and explain Kenneth. I have no clue as to where most of his arguments end up. I find out when he finally tells me where he was going. But yeah, the credentialism, that's the word. Meritocracy is just credentialism in modern society. It's not based on authority like Arendt would suggest it should be.
Thank you, Donald. Yeah, there's an interesting feature of the traditional Okinawan martial arts dojo that as you get promoted, in order to get promoted, you have to take on more teaching responsibilities. And the higher your rank, the more time you spend teaching. And anybody who's not willing to teach, who's in it for themselves, I want to have the knowledge and keep it from anyone else, they don't get promoted. They just stay at the bottom. The generosity of spirit, the cultivation of the rest of the group is a responsibility that we all share. And the more we're able to do it, the closer to a martial arts Aristos, such as, this is a metaphor, not a literal truth, but the closer to a martial arts Aristos, that is a sensei, we become. So It is in its traditional form, not the modern selling black belts for money form, but in the original traditional form, it is a model for trying to overcome Banauseia, trying to offer an antidote, which is that the ladder can't be climbed by a Banausos, unless the Banausos grows out of it and learns to pick up heuristic values, in which case they're gradually ceasing to be a Banausos. It is one of the mysteries among the Greeks, and I'm just wrapping up, and we'll move on to Kenneth's the second prefatory caution, Kenneth's from the text next. But it is one of the great mysteries, Kenneth says, that the Greeks themselves do not know how much of this is just locked in from birth and how much of it is learned. It comes in part from having character be invisible to us and hidden. It's very hard to measure it and figure out its changes. We can sort of sense the changes. We see that in the people that we know, we can gradually pick up some hint of the way that people are changing over time. But what exactly is going on we have no direct access to it, and it makes figuring these things out very hard. So the consequence is Banauseia something that you're born to become? Or is it a stage of development that anybody under the right circumstances could grow out of, assuming they got that far, on their way to Aristeia, which is the, according to Hegel, the adult, mature form of the mind of Homo sapiens? And the answer is nobody knows. And this isn't something anybody studies today. There's nobody in neuroscience uses these categories per se. Ari does a great job of showing us parallels, and they're very important parallels. There's research going on all the time that can contribute to our understanding of this stuff. But those categories, douloi, banausoi, aristoi, no neuroanatomy or neurophysiology researcher uses those categories or recognizes them as legitimate, because they're not about things you can stick a ruler next to. They're about the quality or character of the resulting whole system of the mind. And that's the stuff science has the very hardest time figuring out how to characterize. Um, Anybody who works in cosmology will see the same issue. You can figure out a planet or a moon or a solar system or a galaxy, but you start getting into these giant supergalactic structures, and we run out of words for how to even name what is that structure we're looking at. And I can't remember. There's one that's got sort of a Hawaiian name, Lanai, or so. I can't remember it. It's one of the giantest structures in the universe that has been given a name so far, and it's piles upon piles upon piles of superclusters of galaxies in some kind of a giant
The
current.
Great Wall.
No. Although that's not a bad metaphor for it. But whatever it is, it's we don't even know how you would name that shape, or what is that kind of thing. Or when you start getting into the whole of things, you get to the stuff that is at the opposite end from where science begins. Science begins with one measurement and then another and then another. And to see the whole size of the cosmos, you need cajillions of measurements and some way of talking about how it's all put together. Words fail us, concepts fail us. And so douloi, banausoi, aristoi, we shouldn't be surprised that these are not yet topics in neuroscience, neuroanatomy. Stephen, tell us what's on your mind.
Oh yeah, I'm a bit worried about treating the banausoi as a pejorative too excessively. I'd rather say, well, let's picture the good douloi and the good banausoi and the good. And yeah, you're being a bit too positive about the Aristos, because you can have a bad Aristos as well as a bad banausoi. So, first of all, people want to be good to start out. Evil is a temptation. The Christians in the Middle Ages believed that the devil was waiting around each corner to tempt them. Today, we don't see that any longer. There is no nature or character to be corrupted. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Stephen. And you're right. This is something that you'll see is the way we talk about Duloi, Benoussoy, and Aristoi shifts from conversation to conversation. And I'm going to underscore your point by pointing out that when Donald was talking before, he used the word techne, and I put it in the chat. That's knowledge about how to do things. It's technical knowledge, how to accomplish things. Banausic it is Banausic understanding. How do you build a bridge that doesn't fall down? How do you write a program for a computer? This is Banausic knowledge. Banausea isn't only about social climbing. It's all forms of systematic thinking. And so that includes trades that you learn how to do, where you might have apprentices and journeymen and masters, and you have to work your way up in learning. If it involves a lot of learning and training and systems and ways of making decision, carpentry is Banausic. Plumbing is Banausic. Donald gave us examples from the ancient Greek world. Um, Being a lawyer or a lawmaker is Banausic. Anything where you have to learn a bunch of stuff. In fact, the entire university system, a point Kenneth makes frequently, doesn't he, Donald? The entire academic system is Banausic, even when it's trying to be eristic, which he says is one of the ways that philosophy is killed in the modern world, is it's put in the hands of Benoussoy to train the next generation on philosophy, which, of course, by the time they're done with it, is nothing like philosophy at all. Ari, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
I wanted to build on what Stephen was saying. It's kind of a steelman approach to this. And I was thinking, like, we're almost, let's say, talking about a Banausis, and this is not an accurate metaphor. It's very analogous that, you're talking about like a Banausis, like it's a, and I'm like, well, dude, viruses are so good in so many ways in keeping the bacteria population in the ocean, right? So it's like the key here is alignment with your environment. And so I think all of these things, an Aristos, a Banausis, and a Doulos, they're all going to be essentially terrible. They're out of alignment. And what you see is that I don't know, it's like, it's hard to determine the environment, but I think what I'm saying here is they all make bad masters, because that's like you're saying the master of your environment. It's like the Aristoi is recognizing this is my environment. I'm going to do these things in these ways for my environment. And a Banausis is also like winning is like what my environment wants me to do, or be technical, right? I was interesting that there's Hebrew languages that's the lines with this too. I honestly think that Greek and Hebrew are basically sisters and brothers, because they're both alphabet and they're the beginning of alphabet. One is aleph and bet, and the other one is alpha and beta, right? So similarly, there's a term for like this unification of knowledge. That's a trifecta, which is the Chachma, Bina, and Das, which is actually, have you ever heard like the group Chabad? That's that acronym put into words. And essentially is Chachma is universal knowledge of like an expertise. It's like whenever it's referred to, there's a type of expertise in going on. That sounds very much like Banausic knowledge. You've got some technicality, and it's a pattern that always, it's systemic, right? And then Bina is this sort of like intuitive feeling approach to things. And it's not necessarily perfect, but then the key is Das is a unity between those two, where it's a sort of embodied wisdom. I honestly think the Das sounds a lot like Sofer Sune, because it's also talked about, what you're supposed to come close to and not what you're supposed to stay away from, kind of thing. And you have your environment. But I think all of these things are like, if you're in alignment with your environment, it's also interesting in the language of like, is a virus alive or not? Well, it's totally not alive. And then you put it inside a cell, and if it's been deactivated forever, it automatically starts doing its thing. So it's like, well, was it alive that whole time and it was just deactivated? So it's interesting, and this is Nick Lane's usage in his famous book is the Vital Question. Talks about life this way. It's like, well, it's really about what's going on with its environment. And there's also the claim from like Richard Dawkins that all organisms are a model of their environment. Very classic, good biology. All things are modeling their environment. Absolutely. So the point is, you're both trying to master your environment in some way. You're supposed to have agency, but you're always in service of being with your environment, which creates an alignment between like my needs and what the environment needs. The whole point is to be in alignment. And I think that works for like all of these three. And if they're ever out of alignment, it's where it's like acts more like an invasive species or something. It's going to be really destructive to the overall vitality of the environment and the organisms involved.
Yes.
All right, that's it. Yeah.
Thank you, Ari. Yeah, that's right on, and that underscores what Stephen was saying. I'm gonna underscore both of you one more time, and because this is a critical point to make. Kenneth often disparages Benalsoy, not because he thinks we'd be better off without them, but because they're running everything, which is not their function. As long as they're not governing, they don't have to be, not only do they not have to be a problem, they're a blessing. Where would we be without carpentry? Where would we be without stoneworking? If nobody could build a bridge, where would we be? I mean, how do you do sewage sanitation? It's a science, it's a technology, right? How do you get clean water to people? How do you process smokes, industrial smokestacks to release breathable air again? These are things we can't live without. And they're technical skills. It's techne. All of this stuff is a blessing. As Ari says, when it's in the right place, in the right balance, used the right way. And it's not an optional blessing. These are mandatory. We have to have these things. Furthermore, Kenneth's line, I think, is that Banausea itself, even to the budding Aristos, is a stage of development that they must go through to learn the lessons about themselves and their relationship to the world before they have any chance of getting to an heuristic stage. Because you can't go from everybody's born a doulos. We are all born live wired, 100% experience, 0% reflection and pattern making. We have to learn reflection and pattern making over time, right? There is no way to go directly from Dulea to Aristea. It just can't be done because you're cutting out the whole noetic side of your mind. So these things are blessings. Where they become a curse is when you've got the wrong people governing. It's not, and this goes to Stephen's point as well. The other point that he made that I didn't respond to and I should have is he's also right that being an Aristos doesn't mean you're good, right? All it means is that you've overcome the kinds of flaws that Duloi and Banausoi have. But there's a whole world of flaws out there that you could still be afflicted with. I mean, right? You could still be a massive problem. Just because you don't have those problems doesn't mean you don't have any problems, right? You could be a terrible, terrible person as an Aristos. But at least you don't have these issues. That's what it means to be an Aristos. There are issues that we understand very well that are problematic about Dulea and Banausea that go along with their strengths. That are this, we say a two-edged sword or the other side of the coin, but really there's a martial arts concept of the block that is also a strike, where it's exactly the same thing at the same time, and it serves both functions. And that's how it is with the strengths and weaknesses of a doulos or the strengths and weaknesses of a Banausos. They are the exact same qualities, just in context or not in context, in balance or not in balance, in harmony or not in harmony. The same consistency and regimentation and ability to build house after house after house is great right up until you get to a situation where that would have been the wrong thing to do. And then the Banausos just makes another one just like it. And that's where the Aristos would have said, oop, not there. Like in Seattle, we have these incredibly steep slopes. Nobody should build on them. And 99% of the time, it seems fine. I mean, you get higher, you're a Banausos, you're really great at construction, you get hired to build a house there, you can do it. You can put the house on that steep slope and you'll be fine for 4, 5, 6 years until the next major rainstorm and then the house goes sliding down the hill. And the Banausos couldn't see it coming, but the Aristos can. Because the Banausos is replicating the pattern, which they have mastered and which you're the master of. They have techne, but they don't have judgment, which is that faculty that Hannah Arendt died before she finished writing the book about it. Echoing Donald. John, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Hey, Rick. So something that Steve was saying earlier got me to thinking about the distinction between Banause and Aristoi. So, like, for example, would you say that, like, somebody who goes to school and gets a degree and, say, becomes a doctor, and then they have Banausoi, but they're just kind of going through the motions and they're not really like trying to like cure the patients as much as they're trying to, do the forms and get reimbursed and all that. versus an Aristoi who's kind of like somebody who's like in the same position. He's also a doctor, but he like is trying to like actively help, and he's kind of engaged with his role, and he's trying to like figure out like what the modern research is and what's best for my patients. Is that kind of the distinction between Aristoi and Benousoi? Like somebody who just like has the degree and is just kind of like, you know, this qualifies me to do it. There's a barrier to entry for everybody else, so I'm guaranteed a good income, versus somebody whose like heart is really in it and like is really like putting in like, their full effort into like getting the job done regardless of like really the consequences.
Yeah, you're describing some of the motivation differences between Benousoi and Aristoi. These are really complicated subjects. Like Stephen was alluding to, they can manifest in more than just good or bad. So you could get a Benausos who is determined to be the best doctor ever. And he reads all the journals and he tries as hard as he can. But he's doing it in order to satisfy his need to master the subject and to be systematized and up to date. And he might not even think in terms of the money. He might just be thinking in terms of climbing the ladder of excellence and being the most excellent doctor. But you see this with surgeons a lot, where they're just incredibly arrogant. Anybody who works in a hospital, you know that not every surgeon is incredibly arrogant, but a lot of them are very arrogant. And I say that with love. I've worked in hospitals for decades, but it's necessary. You need a certain amount of arrogance to go through the extra training required to be, say, a neurosurgeon. And you need a certain amount of arrogance to even pick up the scalpel and start cutting on someone's brain. You really need a certain distance. If you're too empathetic, you will not be able to put that scalpel into that brain, and the person may die. She didn't get the tumor out. So there are ways in which the Banausic tendency towards lack of empathy and tendency towards mastering a topic can lead to excellence. And Aristos, and I'm gonna run again with Stephen's idea of showing the flip sides of both. And Aristos might or might not put in as much, might not succeed as well in rising to the top of the neurosurgeon profession because they might be distracted by dealing with their own bullshit, which is something everybody should do, but only Aristoi are well qualified to do. Aristoi, as you're going to see in this paper, are highly motivated to deal with their own bullshit, to try to overcome the crap that's inside them. And Banausa could give a shit about that. That's for one thing, who even believes there is an insight, right? Lots of Banausa don't think there is a soul, or if there is a soul, it's the one that's been prescribed according to their religion. They don't. It's not a subject of concern and introspection the way it is for an Aristos. And Aristos, as Kenneth says in this paper, is really concerned about what baggage am I carrying around inside my character? And how do I not be a slave to that baggage? What do I have to do to overcome that baggage? All these kinds of masteries take time. Nobody can master everything. So the more time you're putting into, especially if you were born with a really messed up character, if you're an Aristos, you've got your work cut out for you. You may be spending a lot of time combing out the crap inside yourself. And some other guy, a Banausos, he's not wasting to a Banausos, this is a waste of time. He's not wasting his time cultivating his character, and so he can be a better neurosurgeon. So the outcome for patients can vary. I just gave extreme examples in order to illustrate Stephen's point about it's not as simple as good and bad. But in general, yeah, the motivation of a Banausos is abstract, technical, and systematized. Could be climbing a social ladder, could be trying to become an expert at something, could be, there's a lot of ways it can be. They could love the craft and just want to, be great at the craft. Donald and I see this all the time in programmers. There's a wide variety of reasons why we are both in Banausic professions. Programming is a Banausic profession. It's very meticulous, very detail-oriented, very systematized. You have to be able to handle complexity and organize it with layers within layers within layers of modularization and so forth. So it lends itself to the Banausic personality. But you find a lot of Aristoi flirting around in here for similar reasons. And some of them make exceptional programmers and some of them make terrible programmers. But what unites them is that they do, in fact, care. They are trying to get to the deeper issues. I mean, the Challenger disaster is a classic example. Who would speak up and say, you absolutely have to stop this flight? I don't trust these O-rings. Who would first of all recognize that that's a problem, and then who would risk their career to try to make the point? And when it became clear that it was going to be a career risk because the executives were desperate to get the thing launched, who was going to say, I know you're going to hate me for this, but you really still can't do it? That's one of the places where you'll find the division, because Aristoi have a greater capacity for self-destruction in a good cause. It's not an infinite capacity, and you still get bad Aristoi, but it's that question of what is the big picture, what is healthy for not just me, but the whole, me and the whole together. These are the sorts of things Aristoi worry about all the time. Geneva, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Kind of interesting what John was saying and what you all are saying, because I used to think of this in law school. And I guess in law school they teach you how to follow the numbers, not necessarily whether or not you're doing a good thing for the people or the people that you represent. It's like following the numbers and doing the right thing as far as the numbers go. And I can recall, and a lot of these people were really young, and I don't think they meant any harm. But you know, when you go to law school and you get your legal position and you're a public defender representing probably the worst of the worst that there are to represent, and you're not waltzing into court with your little briefcase and your cute little outfits and makeup like you see on television. You're actually sitting in lockup with 50 people who were homeless. God only knows what they smell like and look like, and uh, let alone trying to explain to them what's about to happen, what your job is, what's they're probably going to end up in jail, blah blah blah. And some of these people, they were very young, and I used to watch them stand outside the jail with the clients behind them, and they're talking about their trip to Greece. And I think maybe you guys should take that outside somewhere. These people, you know, can't even get out of, they don't even have a bed to get out of. And you're standing here chit-chatting about your trip to Greece. Just something about that just didn't work for me. And I assume that's just because they're young, maybe, but how could you not see that that's not a conversation that needs to be held in a lockup with people who barely have anything? Uh, it just kind of irritated me, and I guess one of the things in law school that bothered me is as long as you could get the 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 elements of whatever it was you were talking about correct, that was all they cared about. It didn't seem to teach anything about compassion for people, where people come from, where you come from, how it fits together. And it was probably because I was much older when I went to law school and uh, had lived life and had a career prior to this, that I could pull these things all together. And so it's just kind of nice to hear that you know, it's not just in the field of law that these things happen. I was not very good at taking tests. A lot of these people were excellent test takers, and they just breezed through. I had a really hard time, not because of the material, but because I just don't take tests well. I talk well. I can interview well. I just don't. And as soon as you put it on paper, I freeze. So there's a lot of things involved in these three. I don't know whether, I guess I would think the law is a Benoit, but however you say that word,
Anausic.
falls, yeah, it falls into that category.
It's very
But there are shades of all the others involved as well. So I don't know that people necessarily fall into one category or the other. It seems like they're transitioning from one to the other and backwards and forwards. And And I guess an evolutionary kind of process, 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's just nice to hear, that I'm not nuts. Well, I am nuts, but yeah, I'm in good company, to put it that way. Yeah.
This is a sign language for crazy. And I always imagine we should be doing this for weird. That's right. Yes, I'm weird. It's when we're introducing these topics the way we are now, it makes them sound simple, like they're just simple categories or objects and that they obey the laws of physics, but they don't. They're right. This is Greek stuff, and so it behaves the laws of biology, growth and transformation, and what is your inner character that is striving to express itself. And sometimes it expresses itself by hiding things and only showing them under the right circumstances. And sometimes it expresses itself by changing over time, one way. And all of this is in flux all the time. And some of it is easy to change and some of it's hard to change, and we don't know which is which in advance, sometimes even afterwards. It's a very complex field to talk about. And when you then take it and try to apply it to a field of life like the law, I mean, it gets even messier. There are people who become defense lawyers out of compassion, and they want to help people who don't have the resources that they ought to have in a just society. And there's people who become defense lawyers to get rich because they want to find rich clients who will pay them gobs of money to get off, from doing crimes. And they're both defense lawyers, but they've got completely different motivations and probably go through school differently. I've taught my whole life. My job involves a lot of teaching, and I could see early on that there are people who test well who are terrible at their job, but they sure test well. And there are people who test terribly who are great at their job. And it's one of the things you learn as an educator is that tests are sort of a blunt instrument when it comes to trying to figure out who's going to be good at doing something. The best way to find out if someone's going to be good at doing something is to do it with them. It's a Donald will tell you that, right? The interview is all well and good, but if you sit down and program with somebody, you learn so much about them as a programmer that you could never find out in an interview. Or if they just bring you canned slices of software. Oh, I totally wrote this. Did you though? Here's a blank screen. Let's sit down. Let's write me a for loop. Give me the Fibonacci numbers. I want to see the first 50 Fibonacci numbers. Let me see how you do it. You learn things about people by watching them do the work that there's no other indirect way to figure out. And all of this is just an explore. It's all extrapolations of this Greek concept that character is really hard to figure out. What is going on in somebody? It's what makes it so amazing that the Greeks came up with this sophisticated philosophical anthropology, despite the fact that they didn't have microscopes, they didn't have genetic analysis. They're missing all of the tools that we have, but they're just astute observers of human nature. Donald, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
I was thinking a bit about what you said about surgeons, and then I think it was John asked about doctors. And it reminded me, I go see a cardiologist, and he's a really bright young doctor. Did research work at Harvard after he became a doctor, stuff like that. The whole staff loves him. And, but he also is by the numbers. You're a patient, you get 10 minutes uninterrupted. And one time I was in there and I said, he starts asking me a question. I said, wait a minute, I'm fine. Let's take the 10 minutes and talk about something else. I said, I sit in your waiting room. Everything you treat is basically a consequence, a symptom of being overweight. And yet you treat these symptoms all the time. I said, why don't you run a weight loss clinic? What are you doing treating secondary symptoms, but not primary stuff? And by telling that, I'm trying to get to John, what might differentiate a banausic doctor from an heuristic doctor. You know, I mean, in one of Plato's dialogues, Socrates says, you know, you can't cure the body until you cure the soul. Now, we don't even know what that means now, but we could look at what are derivative problems, secondary problems, problems which in themselves are only symptoms of underlying or profound conditions, and work on those. But those might be hard problems, you know. I mean, but I think that's what we should. You know, gosh, you know. Well, that's enough. I hope that may have helped John a bit in what kind of activities would differentiate the two in the medical field.
Yes. Yes. It's evolutionarily part of the function of the Aristos is to diagnose and correct the society. So whether that's the systems by which we practice medicine or how we vote or what have you, they're the ones that are looking for the patterns that a Benausos can't see, that go deeper than a Benausos can see. As you'll see in this paper, Ken, it's going to talk about the whole level of principles and values is invisible to the Benausos. They can learn the patterns, but they think in cause and effect. They can't think deeper than that. Unless they grow, unless or until they become dissatisfied with the surface, the two-dimensional life, and they start looking for the depth of reality, and then they begin growing out of being a Benausos and become an Aristos. The prince, if Heraclitus is right that the critical thing about nature is not the stuff that we see, but the invisible stuff underneath that produces all the stuff that we see. The stuff we see is the level of the Benausos, who can be the world's greatest peach orchard manager. But the level below that of why do things grow the way that they do? How do ecosystems work? Why, you know, why doesn't the acorn grow up to be something other than the oak? You know, until the advent of genetic analysis, that used to be just the realm of the Aristoi. It's trying to look at the deeper archive. Ari, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Okay, I have two thoughts. First, I was also going to not respond, but inspired by John about the doctors. I thought a wonderful model of this embodied is MASH. MASH is this weird unit where they do all these amazing things, but they're all a bunch of Aristoi, except for a few characters. And so one of the classic characters that's the total like caricature of a Banausoi is this guy Frank Byrne, and so he just wants, and he's so insecure. All he needs to do is win and get status, and he just cares about money. He doesn't care about anything. And then they replace him as a character, and they get another guy named Winchester, and he's also a total Benausos, but eventually he becomes more like an Aristoi, as opposed to Frank, who just, it's interesting, he goes crazy, but he gets promoted in the army, and that's their joke. But then the real thing that I think that maps onto this is our real Aristoi that we're looking at the whole time is Hawkeye. And he's always interested in what's really going on and hates the war. And essentially because he's got this sense of injustice and cares so much about everything around him, he eventually goes insane. Like that's the end of MASH. He goes crazy. He's in an insane asylum. He can't make it, right? And that's also, I feel like, the lesson here. If you're going to be an Aristoi and you stick to your guns long enough, and you in a Benausic world where you really want to be successful, you're probably going to break. You're probably going to break down. So, but the next thought I wanted to share that was hopefully simple, but it's a huge complicated thing in its own. So, but I'll give the very top contour of it, is there seems to be something similar, according to Jonathan Sachs, Rabbi Sachs, about the Jewish model. So the Jewish model is there's three types of crowns. There's the crown of kingship, there's the crown of priesthood, and then there's the crown of Torah. So Torah represents like education or just knowledge. But in case, what it represents is that the king is good at acting. He's good at whatever model you give him, he's going to act, but he's not good at thinking or modeling. So this actually varies a lot like a douloi in the sense that he's just a dog chasing cars. That's the king's model. But he's at the top and he's doing it for the sake, but he's just running the kingdom as no idea like what models are better. He just takes the model and he uses it and he tries to use it the best he can. So it's kind of like, in this case, he's like the farmer making wheat. And then the priest is the Benausois. Clearly, this is mapped on perfectly because he's all about cycles and perfect information, models. And you go outside of the models, that guy's done. And then last is the crown of Torah is for the prophet, who's very much the Aristoi. They're the guy who's trying to diagnose the society. He comes from anywhere and everywhere, woman or man, which is interesting in the Jewish language that I don't subscribe to as much, but traditionally it was the first two are only for men, right? That only men could be kings and only men could be priests. But this prophet person could be not only from some sort of dynasty of bloodline, like you get a king or a priest, but that comes from anywhere. The lowest to the highest is where you're supposed to get the prophet. And the prophet is essentially this person who's very good or very bad at acting and very bad at modeling, because they're always in competition between what's the right action and what's the right model, and essentially can see things that other people can't see because they're in this sort of like diagnosis and very self-sacrificial model of like, it's not about me. It's just about what's going on, and I want to just help fix what's going on. And so it's interesting that also the definition of a prophet in this case is never a prediction. It's not the same thing as a prediction, because the prophet is basically saying, but you want to avoid. There's a cliff going up, and let's go do something else. And it's not especially say like what you should do. That's for like the priest or the king. But the guy is just to point out there's a cliff going up, and if you keep going, we're all going to go over the cliff. And so it's interesting because I don't know what maps well to this sort of triad, but there's definitely a lot of interesting similarities. But they're also for the exceptional person, not the average person. And this is well known that like the average person is just as their average things, and it's almost like maybe the average person is just a doulos, or maybe some sort of a Benausos, but in a small scale. So if you're trying to run your farm, you should be a Benausos if you want to get the best crops, and you would like, that's okay. Like, or you just want to have whatever, like you're good at Mahjong and you like playing Mahjong. Like, okay, well, it's in Mahjong, so nobody cares. So it's like when you're trying to run all of society, you have so it's interesting. It's just, but it's similar, but different. I thought I'd share that last idea.
That's interesting, Ari. Thank you. I hadn't heard about this before. And you're right. There's some parallels here, aren't there? It's something to chew on. Stephen, come on.
Yeah, I studied a lot. I studied that a lot, and it's complicated. It reminds me a lot of the depth and weirdness of the Aristoi and the Douloi of the
Benausois. Yeah. It's got some similarities there, doesn't it? Stephen, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Well, the Aristos is a leader. The Aristos is a person who will, it's like a conductor in an orchestra. It's a person that gets all the different people to operate together. As you were saying, the body of men that becomes a cosmos. What I can see with the Douloi, if I'm a Douloi, I'll just go and do my simple job. I don't want much. I want to avoid responsibility. This is a point Kierkegaard makes, that I want to avoid responsibility so I can spend all my time concentrating on my belly button and the things that make me happy. I might do my job. It's my golden moment is Saturday night at 11 o'clock when they got Star Trek, the original series on. They're like, I'm not going out on Saturday night because there's an episode of Star Trek and I'll miss out on it. So I'm locked there for 2 years watching all the Star Treks.
And after my own heart.
Yeah. I just want to curl up with Star Trek. I want to avoid the world. I want to avoid the complexities. They hurt. They're painful. I just want to, finally that golden moment when I'm curling up with Star Trek. I'm safe and secure, and I don't have to worry because I imagine that there's other people doing the work that doctors have to do. Too much responsibility for me. I don't want to do the technical job. And I'm happy that there's some wise leadership up there in the halls of power making me safe and secure so I can sit there in the dark on Saturday night feeling safe and secure watching Star Trek. But of course, if I step outside that world and let's say try to and engage in work which is more responsible, which is more difficult, I'm starting to find my boundaries. I'm starting to find my limitations. But if I was to step outside that into the world of Aristos, you're staring the Medusa in the face. You're starting to find out things which, as a duoloy, you were safe and secure from. How do you handle the darkness? It's like Jordan Peterson, the great Jordan Peterson. I like to say that to annoy people. He points out Jung's point about the shadow. We ignore the shadow. The other great example there was Goethe in his internal battles. I think Goethe was a person was naturally insane. He had to learn the ability to overcome his insanity. He knew he had a problem. He had to somehow find an answer for it. And in that, he encountered the doppelganger. He discovered there's another person next to him that is a part of him, but that other person is also trying to screw you over. He found his Mephistos was his doppelganger. So once you start to jump outside the world of the duoloy into the world of greater responsibilities and where you have to live up to a higher mark, you're starting to encounter the difficulties. But if you jump outside of that into the world of leadership, that is giving other people direction, that's a whole new level. You're going to find things that are just not in that life of the duoloy, where you're nice and safe with your navel. So what we're hearing a lot from the so-called leadership today is we'll create, as you said, the perfect system. We've got the perfect set of ideas. They can't imagine that they're going to face a situation where their systematic ideas don't work anymore. It's beyond them. That concept is beyond them. They believe that you can have the perfect system and the perfect approach, which always works. There's a hierarchy of ideas, and that hierarchy always works. And this is where we are today. But so yes, this will be the interesting thing where there's a claim that the modern world is weeding out the Aristos. I would need to be given more examples. One of the things when I was doing wargaming, I wanted to create a war game of the late Roman Empire. So I was studying all the barbarians. And I went over, like a simpler scenario, the Vikings versus the Anglo-Saxons and the Franks. Now, the modern fictional TV series claims that these three peoples were very different peoples, which is completely false. The Franks, the Anglo-Saxons, and the Vikings were very much the same culture. But I was wondering what the Vikings were, the barbarians, but why were they being so successful? Because they didn't have the techniques, they didn't have the technology, they didn't have the money. And one thing you started to see when you sift through the material is Viking society, this sort of very rough and violent and many things society was one where the system was far more basic. It seems to be the one which was creating the situations that propelled leadership. The trouble with the Vikings is when you killed one leader, there was another 10 to replace them. It's sort of like the story of what's his face, Ragnar. You know, the Earl of King of Northumbria or whatever has killed Ragnar. We finally got him, no problem. And then 10 of his sons appear. Who was it? Who was the other guy? King Alfred figured it out when he caught Guthrum. I'm not going to kill Guthrum. I'm going to baptize him as a Christian. I'm going to be his godfather, and I'm going to send him back to East Anglica to keep the other Vikings out. He'll take care of the Vikings for me.
Much smarter.
Yes. But well, Alfred, again, we see the quality of leadership. And he makes mistakes. The legend is he learns from his mistakes. He sits down and he thinks, what did I do wrong? I've got to find an answer. So
heuristic, right? It's heuristic.
The leader is a person who makes mistakes and learns how to do better, doesn't give up.
Yes.
He looks Medusa in the face and feels all the pain and thinks, well, I'll still try and go on anyway. But the rationalists of our world think they can create the perfect system where there are no mistakes, which is nice. But that very system doesn't produce the people that can jump the hurdles. That's the trouble, that we live in a world which was too perfect. It's a world that's falling apart that produces leaders, that sort of talent. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm going to take us into the text because we're, 2 hours plus into today's 3-hour seminar, and we haven't actually started Kenneth's text yet. We finished the abstract last week, and this week I want to take us through Kenneth's prefatory caution. All the things Stephen was talking about, it's all going to come up over and over in this text today and the weeks ahead. So it's the only reason I'm not commenting on all the juicy stuff you gave is that it's exactly on point. It's just kudos to you. So our second main course today is Kenneth's Human Natures, a prefatory caution. Paragraph 7 is the first paragraph of this section. I'm going to read it, and we can talk about it. And I've got the rest of the paragraphs handy. I think we'll get through them today, but we'll see. So this is before he introduces the Greek philosophical anthropology, before he introduces in detail the douloi, banausoi, and aristoi, and before he gives us his conclusions, he wants to give us this caution. It takes a few paragraphs to get through. But it begins like this. If Christianity believed every life is woven by divine design to impress a lesson and draw one into the sphere of spirit, as Kierkegaard superbly argued, the modern view is very different. Life to moderns is just what happens from the outside, externally, incidentally, navigating a wash of detritus in a meaningless stochastic or aleatory accidentalist universe. For moderns see themselves as arbitrary wills who have only a penny-ante or retail freedom to react however they like to the lie of adventitious circumstances. This gives moderns no competence to deal with or even to see the whole of life. They age, but remain idiotes, infants. We'll come back to that word in a moment. Moderns have been formed by a civilizational ideology or culture to take life as it comes, Kierkegaard again, to see it myopically or ad hoc. This makes moderns eminently experimental and adaptable, but it also makes them blind victims of the drift and currents of a fortuitous existence and a mutant anomic form of society Inmates of an asylum where schizophrenics write their own prescriptions. Oh, isn't that a Kennethism right there at the end? So a lot of this is in the summary that David Royal put together for today's session. But critical to this is an idea that, and this is something that Stevens talked about before, that in early modernity, when there was still the big bonus of Christian worldview and ethos as the companion of the newly emerging modern worldview, the way that things were interpreted was radically different because there was a divine plan, right? What does it say on our money? He approves, in Latin, he approves our undertaking. America is God's will. In other words, it says on the money in Latin that God has a plan for us. And we've come up with a plan, and God likes it because it resembles his plan. They see this idea that the purpose of life is to help draw people away from hell and towards heaven, to teach them lessons, to offer their character the lessons that they need to have the aha experience necessary to grow up and wake up and get somewhere. But moderns threw that out, right? It took them a few centuries, but they threw that out. As God said, as Nietzsche said, God is dead. And not that he is dead, but to moderns, he has no normative force under the law. And likewise in the calculations of the economy. And so the result of that is, if there's no divine plan, then there's no plan. There's just a random circumstance of things that happen. And the important thing is to be quick on your feet, right? You got to be clever. Like the heroes of all those Grimm's fairy tales, who grow up the seventh son of a seventh son and they don't know anything and they were neglected. Clever Hans is one of the ones. I think Jack is another figure who just shows up over and over in Grimm's. And the features of Clever Hans and Jack are that they don't know anything, but they got street smarts. They have good intuition, right? They shoot from the hip. That's a modern concept. That's how moderns imagine themselves, as if I'm smart enough and clever enough and adaptable enough, there doesn't have to be a plan. I'll just instantaneously adapt every situation and wring the best out of it I can. Like the poker player who doesn't bluff, but who's just a master at making the most that he can out of every hand. He just got, magically he has the gift. And this is how moderns conceive of themselves. Magically, we have the gift. If we just are smart enough and educated enough, we will just know what to do. And there's no big plan. And there's nothing in us that's getting better as we navigate these situations. There's no direction that any of it's heading. So it's neither a medieval conception, nor is it a classical conception. This is, as I titled this paragraph, modern ad hocism, is that we have an ad hoc view of life. We think there's no point in philosophy because there's no, or religion, because there's no point in trying to understand the big picture, because there is no big picture, because life is meaningless and the only thing that matters is who can win the game. And that's the modern perspective. Next paragraph 8, he continues, and this is about the ancient conception of character in contrast. He says, life for the Greeks was very different. They believed every soul was born with its own life story or mythos implicit within it, pregnant thus with its own intrinsic meaning or essence. So this is the opposite of transcendentalism, right? This is immanentalism. The meaning is in us. It's in nature. We don't need someone from the outside to tell us what it all means. We just need to study the thing itself. Life is the unfolding logic of the psyche. Remember, psyche and ethos, character, like that. They're intimately related to the Greeks. The iron laws of natural identity that make character the most adamantine of elements. Character is fate, right? You can't cheat. Whatever your character is, that's the frame of your picture. Now you might be able to grow the frame, but until the frame changes, this is your limits. Thus adamantine. All Greek myth, tragedy, and Aesopian fable trace out the latency pent up in some strategic attitude towards life. The very word character derives from a Greek term for the impression that marks a coin's specific value and authorization, keeping it from being just generic metal. The character stamped onto the blank, and it makes the coin what it is. And in the same way, our ethos is stamped onto the raw soul stuff of our psyche and makes us who we are. It's why John is who John is and Geneva is who Geneva is, and neither of them is the other person. We don't have a generic soul stuff. The soul is stamped with the ethos, with the character, and the character shapes us, and is our seedbed for change and transformation. The Greek worldview was radically fatalist. In Greek myth, life is the thread spun by Lachesis, woven by Clotho, and cut irrevocably by Atropos, she who is not to be turned aside, death. This is the work of the fates, hammering each life's thread into place against the warp or woof of the cosmos and binding it into the tapestry of history. Humans are fated, but in a way that can be seen only after the fact. They are indeed fated to have just this little foresight about themselves, that they cannot detect their fatedness. Fated not by circumstances or history or external nature, but by the secret energies of the internal logic of psyche, its, quote, hidden law of growth, Heraclitus. For nature, especially human nature, quote, loves to hide. There's going to be a lot of Heraclitus in this section. Anyone who's wondering why I quote Heraclitus all the time, because Kenneth quotes Heraclitus all the time. He's basal. And Hegel says that, Heraclitus is central to him too. Heraclitus is pretty central to existentialist philosophy. So we're seeing in this the massive contrast between I am a infinitely adaptable, generic smarty pants who can just figure out what to do on the fly in every situation. And every situation is random, can't be foreseen, neither can what I do. It's just all, right? The modern concept of life is like the difference between a story and a plot. The story is about character and who you intrinsically are and why things happen. But the plot is just one thing after another after another. The modern world doesn't believe in story because they don't believe in character. They believe in plot, right? Things just happen and you just deal with them, and the end, that's it. It's a kind of nihilism, an accidentalism is what he's saying in paragraph 7. And in paragraph 8, he's saying, but for the Greeks, it was about story. Life is a story. Your character determines what it is that you even notice or care about or want to do. And it's because of your character that when you try to carry out your wants, instead of doing exactly the right thing, you do something that's in character for you, which might be the wrong thing. And then you're shocked that the outcome isn't what you thought it would be, because you had a clear picture in your head about where this was going. But because you shot the wrong target, things don't come out right. And in that gap between expectation and reality is the opportunity for learning. And if you learn, now you've got a story going, right? This is the structure of story. This is how the Greeks believed everything worked. And it's why in a story you have characters. It's not a random happenstance that the term for our inner nature, character, is the same as the term for, somebody in a story. That's why the stories exist, is to give us a way to make visible the invisible part of ourselves. We put somebody into a circumstance so that it illuminates their invisible inner nature by the choices that they make. And thus we can learn who they are. This is the Greek theory of story. And it's the theory of life that they had. And it's the opposite of the modern concept, in which it's all just accidentalist, and in which we have no intrinsic inner nature. Tabula rasa, we think that we could be anything, could be anybody. It all just matters what we decide, or how we're raised or educated or what have you. Paragraph 9, character is fate. What Heraclitus saw, the darkest, most perfectly Greek epigram, was that character is fate. We live according to the resources of character. We see the world and choose our associates and activities according to the impulses of the deepest structures in us, the needs that make up the evolving teleology or logic of purposes of our lives. And of course, as we said back when we were doing chapter 4, which is about the ancient worldview, this notion of teleology is half of the picture. Why does our life turn out the way that it does? Well, some of it is contingency, as Joe likes to say. It's outside of it's around us, right? It's not up to us that a volcano went off. I mean, we couldn't foresee that. Now, from our perspective, even though it might be driven by natural law, there is a strong accidentalist, contingent component to why things turn out in our life the way they do or don't. That's why we're always talking about, are things fair or not fair? So, man, I was going to have a great vacation. It's not my fault a big typhoon flew in. So that's just why do I have to suffer these things? But the Greeks understood that's only half the picture. The other half the picture is your character. Why did you even want to take a vacation during hurricane season in the tropics? Why didn't you check the weather forecast? Why, what kind of person are you when you run into a hurricane? Do you have the sense to turn around and go back the other way? Or do you say, I disbelieve in hurricanes. I think I can tough it out. And then, you have a terrible experience on a boat in the middle of the ocean. There's issues of character that are wound up in this. It's not all character, i.e. agency, what you choose to do. And it's not all contingency, the stuff that happens around you. It's a mix of the two. The teleology is the direction that your life would have gone based on your character, all else being equal. i.e., if we don't factor in contingency, teleology would be the arrow pointing to the outcome. But because there's an enormous amount of contingency in life, that arrow is not pointing to the outcome. It's pointing to your tendency. Where do you tend to strive, whether you know it or not? What do you tend to reach for? What do you tend to notice and care about and try for? That's coming from your character, and it sets a direction, which is the teleology, which may or may not be where you end up, but it's where you keep heading. There's this hilarious board game called Robo Rally, in which you're playing little robots. You get hands of cards, and you get to lay the cards down. The robot has a certain number of registers of moves that you program it with in advance. And you program it based on what you randomly got dealt in your hand. Turn left, turn 3, go forward 2, turn 180, back up 1, these kinds of things. And of course, it's all fun and games until you guess wrong in your mind about what was going to happen if I move forward and the conveyor belt moves me left 3 and then the pusher pushes me over and then, okay, I've avoided the pit. And except it turned out you did the math wrong. And instead of avoiding the pit, you went right into the pit, right? This is the programming, your agency, your character, your teleology had a direction you thought you were going. And then what happens on the board is a bunch of contingency that's not under your control. And the fact that other people have robots and they're programming them in advance and they don't know what you're going to do and you don't know what they're going to do means that by the time you step onto the conveyor belt, it's all going according to plan, except the guy to your left, now it's his turn and he gets on the conveyor belt and now you've been pushed off the conveyor belt. And now the whole rest of your programming for your robot is wrong. It was based on being somewhere that you're not now. This is the issue of teleology and fate. The teleology is a tendency, but it can't control the outcome because there's so much contingency. It's a tug of war between agency and contingency. Even though he's not here this week, Joe, thank you so much. As always, in absentia, thank you for giving us this terminology to think about this framework of agency and contingency. This is really what it is. So let's move on to paragraph 10, right? This is daimons and medievalism. And we'll talk about all this stuff in a few minutes. We'll have plenty of time to go through it. But first, I want to get us through this section. It's short, and he's giving us caveats, things like the caution that I gave at the beginning. He's giving us cautions to think about as we read what's coming ahead. And you can see why he'd care about the stuff ahead, because all of this stuff is based on the ancient worldview, but we don't have the ancient worldview. We have the modern worldview, and it will cause us to misinterpret what it is to be a doulos or a benausos or an aristos. We will try to translate that into modern terms because those are the ones we're comfortable with. And in the act of doing that, we are misunderstanding what the Greeks are trying to tell us. It made sense in the framework of the Greek worldview. It doesn't necessarily make sense from the modern worldview once we translate it into modern English and modern concepts. All right, so paragraph 10. Whatever has ultimate authority over human beings is divine. That's the ancient definition of religion. The sacred things are the things that have authority over us that we can't bargain with. We just have to learn it, right? If it's something you just have to learn, then it's a god. If you don't have any control over it, right? And therefore, our own character is a kind of divinity over us. If character is fate, our character is a kind of little god, which is why character's fate is not actually what Heraclitus said, is it? He said, ethos anthropoi daimon. A man's character is his little daimon, his little god. It rules not over the ocean or over lightning bolts or storms. It rules over him. The god of me is my character, and it makes choices for me without my permission. And I think that they're my choices, but they're not. They're my character's choices. This is this Greek concept he's talking about here. It's a kind of divinity over us, of the lowest order or rank of gods, a daimon. Whether benign, that would be eudaimonia, you is good, eudaimonia, yielding eukosmia, or inner well-orderedness, right? A good cosmos inside of you. Or malignant and chaotizing, dysdaimonia. Instead of creating a cosmos inside you, it creates a chaos inside you. Like the alcoholic gene I was born with. That introduces a chaos into my life most people don't have to suffer from. There are situations that other people will navigate smoothly that if I don't do something about this dysdaimonia that I have inherited, it's going to be a catastrophe for me. My life will enter chaos because of an inner chaos that I'm carrying around with me everywhere I go. But if I learn about it and do something about it, it doesn't have to behave like a chaos. I can compensate for it. This is why these issues of eudaimonia and dysdaimonia are so important. Christianity wants to believe it has liberated humans, and he's talking here about the medieval worldview. Christianity wants to believe it has liberated humans from enslavement to this fatalism, right? When Jesus drives out the demons, the modern or medieval reading, what the original authors understood is that he was driving out the daimons. You no longer have to be subject to your own dysdaimonia, because instead of your own corrupt spirit, you can, if you have faith in Jesus, he can lead you to introduce his spirit into you. And his spirit is a eudaimonia, not a dysdaimonia. He's talking about a substitution of character. And that only works if you follow the example of Jesus and don't treat him like a get out of hell talisman. So you see the differences between different flavors of Christianity there. So Christianity wants to believe it has liberated humans from enslavement to this fatalism. Not nature, but a supernatural God forms our soul, so we can be reborn or redeemed to a higher kind of personality. Our given sinful self thus converted into something illuminated. Necessitarian nature, the pathos of character, is no longer thought to be final, but can be appealed to a higher court. And I'll continue in a moment, but you can see how this operates in early Christianity and the early Christian groups, not only at the individual level, like can I overcome my own, dysdaimonia, my bad character by following the example of Jesus instead of what I would normally do. If what I would normally do makes me sick and hurts the people around me, then there's an enormous benefit if I just avoid doing what I would normally do and do instead what Jesus tells me to do, because Jesus has a eudaimonia. And the more I emulate him, the less I hurt myself and others with my own bad character, and thus the spirit of Jesus enters into me as a character. But it also operates on the large scale, right? The kingdom of God. If the Roman Empire has a sick character, a bad character, a dysdaimonia, then the kingdom of God is the form of political economy that Jesus would recommend instead of what Caesar would recommend. And it can only have a eudaimonia, a good character. So the extent to which we work to create, and now we're back to Stephen's discussion of the apocalyptic nature of early Christianity, the extent to which we work to replace the existing corrupt nations with their corrupt character with the kingdom of God, which has a healthy character, we can spread health and goodness upon the world. It is a catastrophe from the perspective of the Roman Empire, but for everybody who's suffering under the Roman Empire, it's liberation to replace the bad character of the empire with the good character of the kingdom of God. So all these things operate on multiple levels, and all of this is implicit in the original Greek of ethos, anthropoi, daimon, because anthropoi in Greek doesn't just mean one man. It could mean a family or a culture or a neighborhood or a polis or all of humanity. It can mean all those things at the same time. It has some of the ambiguity that the Old English uppercase man has. Which man are we talking about? We're talking about many different scales at the same time. And it applies to all of them. We finish up paragraph 10 as follows. Nietzsche, of course, has argued that far from refuting the fatality of characterological principles, Christianity makes a splendid specimen of their pathos. It has been a slave revolt in the form of morals, quote unquote, a triumph of dualic personality over a whole culture, impressing its perspective in a totalitarian sentimentality. And there he's talking about the medieval, the dominant medieval form of Christianity. And he's talking about the sort of things Kierkegaard was talking about, not individual Christians who might be very spiritual, but the generic Christendom that has made its accommodations with the market and the state, and thereby sacrificed Jesus's message in order to gain advantage in the secular world. Certainly, it is not the case that all humans have been raised up to spirituality. Appetitivism, consumerism, addictivism, obsessivism, bureaucratism, ideologism, academicism show that moderns remain even more slavish than the ancients ever believed possible. Nor is it the case that religions are immune to materialism. Banausic or mercenary mentality has invaded every denomination to subvert it to altogether irreligious purposes. And quite a few neo-religions have been invented and architected for the evident utter purpose of satisfying sub-spiritual Banausic appetites. So he's now pitting in paragraph 10, the ancient and the medieval and the modern conceptions of human character, and is character fate or not, and can you be liberated from your character or not. He's pitting them against each other, doing some comparison contrast. He wraps up, so you can see why, if we're about to have a big discussion of the different forms of human character, he wants to caution us about the three different interpretive frameworks with which we might read the rest of the paper. He's like, be aware of your own tendency to misread what follows, most likely as a modern, i.e., it's all accidentalist and doesn't matter. And it's not real because people don't have character. Or you could read it in a medieval mode and say, sure, you might have a bad character, but it doesn't matter because the church will set you free. And he's like, well, maybe under the right circumstances, a spiritual religious movement might help your character, but a corrupted religious movement could make your character worse. You have to question these things and look more closely. You can't take anything for granted. Simple answers for simple minds are a problem. So, all right. So the last paragraph of his prefatory caution, and then we'll spend the rest of the time talking. This is just to kick off this part of the discussion, so that next week we can start into the paper proper. Okay, final paragraph on character types and truth. It may well be said that the very reason for so many species of Christianity is so every character type can shop around, gratify its appetites, and avoid having its illusions punctured. What the Greeks have to say about human nature has been marginalized and censored even out of liberal arts curricula because it is religiously heretical and politically incorrect to moderns, especially to the high priests of modern orthodoxy, academics. Life is hard and requires courage to confront it, which is why so few people succeed at it. Truth is even harder. Most humans cannot stand to look it in the face, right? And this is an allusion back to the thing that we've said, Kenneth says multiple times about existentialist philosophy. What does he say? He says, all philosophy, like all religion, is either existentialist or escapist. Are we willing to look the truth in the face? If we are, then we're talking about existentialism. And if we're not, if we're trying to escape into the land of theory or ideologies or our favorite, what we would prefer to believe, then it's escapist, right? This is what he's talking about here in these sentences. He concludes as follows. That's why philosophy remains an exercise in aristocratic self-discipline. And it's not an accident that aristocratic is built out of the word aristos. He's talking about aristeia here. The desire to see things as they are is a cauterizing experience. It burns. Most humans, whether Dulic or Banausic, want to be told only what they already want to hear. Their minds are captives of a regimen of habituation or passive conditioning or abysmally self-obscure ultimate character. That's why the truth is wasted on them. Their whole culture is a mendacity of false consciousness or delusion. That the modern market for philosophy is gravely limited is not a refutation of philosophy, but a self-verdict against what passes for human in modernity. So this is his prefatory caution before the rest of the paper. And he could have just said, know thyself, right? I mean, he's warning us, as a man is, so he sees. The reader is going to have an irresistible compulsion to want to reinterpret everything he says in a way that satisfies our existing ideologies and appetites and illusions and delusions. Unless, and this goes back to Nietzsche and why I gave the prefatory caution, unless we bring to this an eristic insistence on overcoming our own reflexes to try to hide the things we don't want to see. Unless we try hard to break up the places where we've equated things that are different and thus hidden parts of reality in a lacuna. Unless we're willing to do that, we're going to find 1,000 reasons not to want to take in what this paper is going to talk about. And he wrote this prefatory caution because he was going to present this paper. So I don't know whether it was the Dallas Philosophers Forum or one of his other philosophical groups, but this paper is drawn from a collection called Old World Principles, and all of them were presented at one philosophical group or another. And many of these philosophical groups are full of Banausoi, and they're not going to like anything he has to say here that's eristic or critical of Banauseia as a mode of philosophy. So he's starting with beware, beware, beware. So I ask, a dumb question. How would you define a prefatory caution? Prefatory means it's a preface. It comes before the main paper. This should be read as not part of the paper, but it's sort of an introduction, a sign on the door to the paper. And caution, because he's cautioning us about how are we going to read and interpret what follows. Because what follows is almost certainly going to offend us, either emotionally or theoretically or both at the same time. Probably both, right? There's a lot of things he says in here that are heresy, according to modern or medieval conceptions of man, God, and nature. So he's trying to doulos, I am my appetite. Yeah. Someday, Stephen, we're gonna have a conversation about that because I understand the impulse to want to be happy, but you can't fool us. We've been with you for years on these calls, and you have critical insight that a doulos would not have. So, John, the definition of Aristoi. Well, here's the problem. He defines it in this paper, and we haven't got to that part yet. Yeah, I can't remember if you were on last week, but if not,
I wasn't.
why don't I give you the paragraphs from the abstract? There's 3 paragraphs that that we did the last 2 weeks from the abstract that define what's a doulos, what's a banausos, and what's an aristos, and they only make sense in terms of each other. So here's the paragraph on the doulos that we covered in the first week. Most primitive is the slavish personality or doulos, dominated by his psyche's raw materials, his needs, his appetites, his impulses. And we know from other things Kenneth's written that every human being begins as a doulos. Every infant is a doulos, because for every infant, the first time they stub their toe, it's the most horrible pain they've ever felt in their life. It's a very short life. What else do they have to compare it to? The first time they drink milk, this is the most amazing food of all time. It's like, it's the only food of all time. Of course, it's the best food of all time. Everything is turned up to 11. They are immersed in a world of immediacy in which their feelings and experiences 100% fill their mind and leave no room for any part of them to stand outside of the experience and comment on it or critique it or notice patterns in it or make theories about it. And when you're in 100% immersed mode, you can't have language, because language is an abstraction that comments upon your experiences. So we all start 100% immersed, and Doulos pull back from that some, but not as far as others. They remain still believing that experience is more authentic, feelings are more authentic, more real, more true to life and to who they are. So he says his life is morally or rationally passive, structureless, dissolute, and myopic. Another way of saying myopic is parochial. He believes in his own experience. He hasn't had anybody else's experience, so he doesn't really believe in them. They're like unreal to him until somebody shares a story with him. Left to itself, it chaotizes into worse pathos. In symbiosis with a master, the doulos can be contained within prudential forms or limits, but still lacks inherent resources for self-control. So then he summarizes the banausos, and I'm listing these because the aristos is defined in terms of the doulos and the banausos. So the banausos, economic order depends on the sense of utility or pragmatism of the mechanical or mercenary personality, the banausos. This mentality is practical and efficient, adaptable to any system of means or techni, yet also myopic, like the doulos, about ultimate ends, i.e. principles, values, meaning. Why is any of this happening? These are not the strong suits of the banausos. The banausoi rise above the occlusive natural psychology typical of the douloi. That is, they can get above their appetites. They can get above the belief that the immediate moment is the most important moment. Live each day as though it's your last is a doulic motto, right? The Benauso says, well, if I spend all my money today, what will I have tomorrow? The Benausos wants to plan ahead. But Benauso have no penetrating principles to elevate them above their own artificialisms, what they've been trained into. The systems of devices and prices. If the world of douloi is essentially something to be consumed and enjoyed, that of the Benausoi is to be controlled and exploited, used and profited from, right? As a programmer, I operate in a Benausic mode. And when I'm operating as a programmer, I look at what the computer can do and I think of it in terms of how do I rearrange these resources in order to accomplish my task? If I'm trying to admit people to the hospital and remember who was admitted and what time were they admitted, I think about how to write a program. What commands do I have? How much memory do I have? The whole thing to me is about use value. That's the Benausic perspective. How do I muster these resources to accomplish my practical tasks? Pragmatism, utilitarianism, these are Benausic. Neither class, neither doulos nor Benausos, has the constraint to temper its irrational dynamisms or serve as authority over its own psyche. That is, both douloi and Benausoi are symptoms of who they are rather than masters of who they are. The doulos is enslaved by his appetites and feelings and experiences and memories. The Benausos is enslaved by his training and ideas and logics and systems and ideologies. Each of them inherently, implicitly believes that's how life has to be lived. The idea that there are other ways to live are alien to them. The only way they acknowledge that there's anything else is to say the other thing is bad. I have the right answer. This is who I need to be. So this, having seen those two, that brings us to his summary in the abstract about the Aristoi. So now I can finally answer. It's an excellent question, John. Now I can finally answer your question. But it only makes sense in terms of the other two. The prospect of a culture of values and a polity to garden them into harmony depends utterly on Aristoi, who lived for the sake of penetrating insight into what is best and most important. And I'll go on in a second, but it's important to underscore this. The critical function, I mean, what an Aristoi cares most about is not pleasing himself. It's not avoiding bad feelings and having good feelings. It's not spending time eating good food and avoiding bad food. It's not that they, wear hair shirts and flagellate themselves. That's going too far. It's that they insist that those doulic, unquestionable motivations for an Aristoi have to be put down to the second rank. Interesting, but not as important. And likewise, systems and education and patterns and logic and math and ideology, those things too have their place and are important. But the Aristoi says those two have their flaws as well, and they cannot be allowed to rule me either. I can't live my life for the sake of perfectly fulfilling an ideology the way a Nazi would, right? It's the Aristoi recognizes that every system has flaws. It has defects. It has things that it will tell you to do that are actually the wrong thing to do, and it has things that it won't tell you to do that are the right thing to do. The system is a partial mismatch to reality. And the Benausos doesn't want to admit that and will just follow the system. And the Aristoi says that is being a slave. You're being a slave to your system. And when you do that, catastrophes occur, as the 20th century teaches us. So the Aristoi says, like my appetites and feelings, my ideas and systems and training have to be subjugated and sit alongside my doulic faculties in second place. And so in first place, I have to make the master be penetrating insight. I have to look past the temptations, the doulic temptations and the Benausic temptations to try to figure out what the hell is really going on. Whether it agrees with a system or logic or not, whether it makes me happy or not. It matters what's really going on. And that's the stuff I need to use to make the decisions about what to do. And douloi and Benauso, I don't believe that such a thing exists. That third realm that the Aristoi work in is invisible to them. It does not compute. They can't operate on that level. So he continues, distinctive of the eristic ethos are its virtues of agonism, or striving for what is best. That is, things don't come, you're not looking for the easy answer. You're willing to struggle for the hard answer. Sisyphus pushing the boulder uphill for all eternity is not a punishment, although it's expressed that way in the Greek myths. It's the reward for Aristoi. By engaging in that struggle against your own preconceptions, you gain the ability to detach yourself from your ideologies, from your logics, from your training, to detach yourself from your appetites and your feelings and parochial prejudices, and to look deeper than that. It's hard to do. It doesn't feel comfortable, even to the Aristos. This isn't about a third comfort zone. It's about leaving the two comfort zones we're born with and moving into a discomfort zone as the only place where we can get leverage against the addictive quality of those two basal faculties of the human mind. So, agonism, or striving for what is best, protean self-cultivation, willing to change yourself, to undergo metamorphosis. In fact, the insistence that you find what's broken in yourself and heal it. You find what's limited in yourself and you break it open so that you can grow into places you couldn't grow before. That's the only way to get out of the trap you're born into, is to strive to grow, to reach for the light. Respect as tolerance for difference among virtues, right? Recognizing that there's not one answer, let alone one answer that I happen to have, but that we each only have aspects of the truth. And you have to search and turn over a lot of perspectives, talk to a lot of people, learn about a lot of subjects, and dig, search, right? To cobble together a mosaic of the truth from the little pieces of truth that you can find. Respect for, tolerance for difference. And recognizing that the virtues compete with each other. There's no comfortable way to deal with truth, compassion, and courage, for example, right? Because sometimes the compassionate thing is not to just blurt out whatever you happen to be thinking. That's not necessarily a loving thing to do. But likewise, there are times when you have to say the truth, even if it hurts. And figuring that out is a judgment call. And likewise, courage and all the rest of the virtues. Aristotle talks about this, the complexities. There's no simple answers when you try to live a life of virtue. A drive for clarity and acuity. In the PDF that I sent you, there's a typo here. It says a drive for clarity and vacuity. Either here or later in the paper. I think it's in the section on Aristoi. It says vacuity. That's a typo. It's obviously supposed to be acuity. Search for articulate insight into ultimacy. And with ultimacy, we're getting into, this is where I got to put $1 in the jar for Stephen. What is essential? And by which we mean what actually strikes to the character of the thing, right? Not to be distracted by someone's skin color or their hair color, or, if they've got a little saying that they say all the time, hey, or, dynamite, these are just characterizations. This is just peripheral stuff. But what matters is what kind of person are you really? When Martin Luther King Jr. says he wants his sons to grow up in a world where they're judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character, he's talking about ultimacy. He wants them to be judged ultimately, not shallowly or trivially by things that don't matter, like skin color. And it's the same for nature and what's around us. To not be distracted, to learn the details, but to not confuse them with the ultimate source of where do things come from, right? The oak tree is good, but if I want there to be an oak forest, I better plant some acorns. I got to look deeper than the tree. I got to figure out what else is going on here. Sacrality of intrinsic value. That is, that some things are sacred. The modern idea that nothing is sacred, everything is permitted, and everything is possible, which Hannah Arendt criticizes roundly. I mean, intensively, she criticizes these parts of the modern conception. The nihilism, nothing to be respected of the modern world. That there's no crime too great that if you have enough power, maybe you should just commit it. That's the modern idea. But the ancient idea, and honestly, the medieval idea, that they both, this is a point Stephen makes too. The medieval world has more clues about the nature of values than the modern world does, because it recognizes that some things have to be sacred. To be an ultra rationalist is to be someone who thinks I should do whatever my reason leads me to. As long as I'm rigorous with my logic, the conclusions must be right, and I must do those things. And Hannah Arendt says that's how you get the Holocaust, is by people inexorably following the logic and not recognizing that they've crossed a sacred boundary. that human life is sacred. It's not to be treated as a number on a spreadsheet or on an IBM computer card. The moment that your logic leads you into thinking, why don't I just round up all the weirdos and kill them? If you believe in the sacred, it will stop your logic and keep it within a healthy realm. But if you hold nothing as sacred, then your logic can take you right into becoming a monster with nothing to stop you. And this happens because the people who are obsessive about logic are forgetting that logic can establish validity, but logic cannot establish truth. Only nature establishes truth. What actually is true. What logic, if we correctly follow the rules from our propositions, the conclusions we reach will be valid. But out of every 100 valid conclusions, 99 of them are false. Because our a priori starting positions were missing something. They were corrupt in some fashion. The logic that we derived carried the corruption forward to a corrupt conclusion. Valid but false is a category that the ultra intellectual can't handle. Stephen pokes intellectuals for this all the time, and he's right on. This is the flaw, and this is the flaw in the modern world. So when he says sacrality of intrinsic value, he's saying there are sacred things that must not be trampled. When the Lakota say water is life during the Standing Rock fight, they're saying the right of an oil company to make megabucks by running their pipeline through the Missouri River should not override the sacredness of fresh water. There isn't that much fresh water to go around. And without fresh water, we all die. We have to have it. It's deeply stupid to destroy a source of fresh water in order to boost this quarter's profits. There is a sacrality, a sacredness to the things that have intrinsic value. And those sacred things have to act as walls that stop us from going too far. Aristoi get it, Benousoi don't. Benousoi say follow the system. Whatever it produces is inherently good. And finally, autonomy and integrity of authentic individuality. The importance of not being a generic person, but of cultivating yourself into an actual individual. Because the combination of factors inside of our hidden mysterious character is always unique like a fingerprint, except that you can see your fingerprint, you can't see your character. You don't know what all's in there. There might be well, of course there's going to be some bad stuff in there, but there's going to be some treasures in there too. And you need to cultivate that stuff. I mean, you're never going to get a Mozart if you insist everybody get the same education. You have to let people diversify into whatever it is that's in their character. And only then do you start deciding, well, yes, you are the world's most successful serial killer, but no, we're not going to. The way that we respect your individuality is by putting you in a cage so that you can't commit serial killer crimes. But other than, violations of what's sacred, we cherish the development of character because you never know what the culture is going to need. And you never know who's got that at the level that the culture is going to require unless you let people grow and develop into what they've got inside them. To Aristoi, what is sacred is not their own biopsychological needs, nor money, power, or social esteem. And I guess I would add to that, going back to our earlier discussion of Benousoi, self-respect, right? The pursuit of excellence. It's not those things, but only an ethos of pursuit of excellence. Aristoian, there's a Greek term, rooted in individual character. And this is the closeout of the prefatory caution that I wanted to get us through today. He's for John's benefit, that gives us the definition of an Aristos. And you can see it's full of loaded terms that all have
Thank you, Rick.
My
Great
pleasure.
explanation. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. It all requires unpacking. It's a whole bunch of keywords and terms, but hopefully it starts to take shape. I think the shortest way to say what is an Aristos is the character type of Aristoi are the people who are not obviously unfit to govern. Duloi and Benousoi are obviously unfit to govern. And Aristos might or might not be fit to govern. I'm trying to bring Stephen's point in here too. You can have bad Aristoi, of course you can. They might or might not be fit to govern. But if they're not an Aristos, they're obviously unfit to govern because they're going to be making decisions based on their appetites and ideologies. And those are terrible, terrible ways to decide what's supposed to happen collectively. So, Ari, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, I had a quick addition to, it's probably what you're saying anyways, but it's maybe a nuanced point, but it sounds like it was missing. So you can just correct me if it's like semantics, but like this idea that the banausis is starting with wrong premises and then things go so badly. So the false thing is like, oh, if I just start with a perfect premise, then everything will be great. And even if that were the case, you could find the perfect premise. I think what reality is teaching us with time is that even if you start with the perfect premise, premises change. So it would have been the perfect one, but now something new happened. And I think this is Hannah Arendt's point that like you couldn't predict a Hitler or Stalin, right? So if you had the perfect premise, like nobody's paying attention to that. Well, they just showed up. Like, well, oh, so you have a new perfect premise. We're like, no, then other new things are going to show up that you can't account for. So it's more like the ceteris paribus that like you're always thinking, oh, if everything's the way it was, then of course this is the perfect premise. I'm like, sure, fantastic. I have no problem with that. It's just that's not reality at all, right? Things are changing all the time. So if nothing changes, then first let's pick a perfect premise and move on. I love it, right? But no, that's right. So, anyways, I thought
that's a great point. Yeah, things are constantly changing, right? Can't step in the same river twice. You see this with housing developments where people slam out the same house design over and over and over. And architect and philosopher Christopher Alexander says the problem with that is even though it's the same house in multiple locations, they're different locations. And you might want to move the window, right? A little to the right or a little to the left might be a spectacular view, but you can't see it because we put the window in the same damn place on every house. You really want to adapt to your circumstances, and every house is in a different place. Otherwise, next thing you know, you've got a view of the garbage cans because that just happened to be the generic place to stick the window. If they'd moved it over a little bit, it could have been a view of Mount Fuji, but they're so rigid and they're just not thinking. They're just stamping out the pattern over and over and over. And so, you get garbage instead of Fuji. It can make an enormous difference. The inability to adapt, the inability to be alive to what's really around you right now. It's staggering. And the other points you made about the unpredictability of Hitler and Stalin, which is one of Arendt's core points about totalitarianism in the modern world, is we want a view of history in which everything is predictable. We want a machine universe. Ever since Newton, we got this cool idea: what if everything was controllable and predictable? And she says that is never ever going to happen. Human character is too complicated and it's too diverse. Each person is different. People are born into the world and you don't know what the hell is in there. It's just we're going to find out over time. And if we acknowledge that that's the case, we might be able to make a civilization together that has a chance. But if we pretend that that's not happening and everybody is just infinitely programmable and we can stamp them all out like Brave New World into different castes that do exactly what we want them to do, boy, are we in for disappointment. Uh, we will end up creating all these people who have no place, whose actual nature gives them no place in the modern world. So we'll make them disposable people, and nobody wants to be disposed of. And next thing you know, you have vast numbers of people who hate the current world order, and they're just waiting to be picked up by a Stalin or a Hitler. Stephen, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, if you haven't got Jordan Peterson derangement syndrome, in this particular video, he puts on his best performance when he's reading notes from the underground. I bet you'll love some of the dialogue, Don't talk to me about rationality. The very word sticks in my throat. Men are not piano keys. If we put everybody on the piano board and they're doing their little tune and they fit nicely into place. Okay, that's one. But the idea is that we'll create the perfect world where everybody is satisfied. And then Peterson goes, but what if being dissatisfied is what satisfies them? But the performance is just beautiful, it's I don't know what Peterson is exactly, but maybe he was more for the Greek stage than anything else, some of his performances anyway. I'd recommend everybody, if you're serious about the philosophy, what's that one I put in the chat there?
Dostoevsky, yeah. I will. Thank you for sharing that. In fact, I'm going to watch it immediately after this seminar because Dostoevsky is one of Kenneth Smith's favorite writers. He quotes from Dostoevsky a lot. And I have not yet done my Dostoevsky period. I'm in the middle of my Arendt period. So I'm just a big pile of ignorance when it comes to Dostoevsky. I'm looking forward to checking out this video. Thank you.
Yeah, I have to say that the message from the underground is just one of the most powerful pieces I've ever seen in philosophy. And it's beautifully put together. It's poetry. It's such inspired prose.
Well, thank you for turning me on to it. I really appreciate it. Well, this is our seminar for today, and next week we begin into the main body of the paper. So I hope you all had a lovely time. I certainly had a lovely time. I love spending time with you all. And we'll take it from here next week. Bye, my friends.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.